I've been building in the tall stack for almost 2 years now. That's Tailwind, Alpine, Laravel, and Laravel Livewire. And my productivity and speed to push things out has gone through the roof. And I wanted to create a simple tutorial going from nothing, from scratch, from zilch, from nada, to production ready live application and teach you how to do it along the way. So this tutorial is something that I wish I had when I first started learning the tall stack, because there's so many things that come out of the box within Laravel, cron, queues, emails, everything like that, that just makes sense. That's just magic. And I want to be able to highlight that, but then also highlight some of the newer things that Laravel has to offer right now. Volt, single file components, and then just Laravel Livewire and some component libraries as well. So let's dive in. So the application that we're going to actually be building is called Note Share, and we actually call it Send Notes, something like that when we start building it out. But the premise is simple. You'll be able to, this is actually live in production, and we'll build something, and it might look a little bit different. We might have some different features just as we go along, but I want to start from nothing and get to this within a couple hours. So let's do it. So anybody can register and log in. And I'm just going to log in with the username that I created. And the basic premise of this is I like to send my wife notes every single morning. So I'd love to be able to create a note, have a perfect subject. I'm like, hey, hope your day goes well. Send like the actual subject of a note, and then tell who to send it to. So for example, I would send it to me the next day. And then you can say, okay, when should this note go out? So if I said, hey, let's just have it go out tomorrow. So when you schedule that note, what's happening is every day at 9 a.m. Eastern, it's going to send all the notes that are scheduled across all applications. And they would get a private little link that says, hey, not private, it'll be public link that says, hey, here's the note, here's who it's sent from, and then you'd be able to heart it and everything like that. So if I was to, go back to my dashboard, I could see how many hearts people have sent, how many notes I've sent, and I'd be able to see when it has been sent, if that makes sense. And that's it. There's a lot of things that are kind of going on underneath the hood of this application, but I think the premise of this and some of the features that we'll be building really just speak to how easy things are with Laravel, and hopefully how fast you can be with Laravel and Livewire. So this tutorial is meant to be for people who are starting out, who have not touched Laravel at all, and for people who have touched Laravel. Maybe you'll learn some things along the way. I'm not an expert developer. I'm not someone who knows all the ins and outs of Laravel and the best practices and everything like that, but I have learned how to build an application in a way that works for me, and that's what this tutorial is all about. So I'm going to kind of start from the beginning, start from the basics. You might know some of these things and you might not. You might have PHP and Laravel set up. You might have already done it. The premise of this is, if you have experience or if you don't, hopefully this tutorial will give you some groundwork of how to build an application from nothing to something. So let's do it. Let's start off with actually installing Laravel. So the first thing that you are going to want to do is make sure you have like a way to run Laravel on your machine. The easiest way, if you're on Mac, is going to be Laravel herd. If you are not on Mac, let's see. There's a couple different options. So Sail is basically like a Docker system that you can do on Windows. There's also something called Laragon for Windows. I would check that out as well. And if you're on Linux, you probably already know what to do. And we're going to be using something called WIREUI. And basically, this is just an easy way for us to get nice looking components out of the box without having to, mess around with custom Tailwind and spend most of the video doing that. This is basically just component library using Laravel, Livewire, Alpine, and Tailwind. So why don't we get started? I'm going to open up my terminal, and the basic command that you get out of the box with Laravel herd And if you installed Laragon or just like that Docker library is going to be the composer Laravel, or it's just Laravel. So Laravel new, and I'm just going to actually, let me go into my sites folder, and I'm just going to do Laravel new send notes, and that's going to be the name of our application right now. We're going to start off with Laravel Breeze, and I'll show you what this is in a little bit. But basically, Laravel Breeze is a starter kit that gives you authentication and a few other nifty things like, hey, here's a dashboard page, here's a profile link. Just all out of the box. So let's go ahead and do that. Laravel Breeze. And I'm going to use the Livewire Volt class API. You can follow along with this tutorial using the functional API, using something like React or Vue with inertia. But I'm going to be using the class API just because it's a little bit more familiar with people who are familiar with PHP. If you come from the JavaScript world, you might find yourself being very attracted to the functional API. I do like it, but for the premise of this tutorial, I'm just going to stick with the class API. Livewire Volt class API. And basically what Volt is single file components in Livewire, very familiar to the React world, for example, where you'll have all your server functionality in the top of the file, and then your view functionality in the bottom of the file. So that way you're not having to, it is co-locating those files. We're going to say no for dark mode support, just to make it a little bit easier. We won't do any tests in this particular video, but we'll select pest, and then I'm going to initialize a Git repository. Perfect. And now, like I said, the premise of this video is to get us up and running as quickly as possible. So I'm going to try to do as little cuts, as little editing as possible, just so that this feels very familiar, very fast-paced, very, how would this look like if you were building something like this in a weekend, in a night, in a weekday, whenever you have free time to learn Laravel, to learn Livewire, to build an application that is ready for production, that can scale with the services that we're going to be building on, with the packages that we're going to be using. It's not something that is just a fun little tutorial, fun little project to build. This is something that you can start using in production, start being ready. And hopefully you'll be able to find out, different ways to build an application that works for you. We're going to use the SQLite, and in production we'll use Postgres because we're going to deploy to fly.io, just because it's the easiest way, at least right now for me. I think it's the easiest way to kind of get up and running. None of the services, none of the applications that we're going to be building are any sponsored or anything on this video. It's just stuff that I like to use, and stuff that I can get up and running. I also have a lot of applications deployed on Laravel Vapor, which is Laravel's service for AWS, but it's a little bit more complicated in this video, and Fly has a generous free tier, which is awesome, especially for this video. So you can deploy this for free. You don't have to worry about paying anything. I think Fly does say that you have to input a credit card, but we'll get there when we get there. So let's go ahead and get into our send notes folder. Okay, and we're ready to go. A few things that we have to do. So we have a Git repository all set up. We'll create a new GitHub repo here in a little bit. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and run npm run dev. That basically starts the development server using Vite. And in a new file folder, I'll basically just say, or new terminal file, I'll go ahead and just kind of have that ready. But basically now we can go to send notes.test, and we have our Laravel application up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and this is basically just everything that it's the Breeze install out of the box. So we have things like login and register. And before we go ahead and try logging and register, these pages can, but we don't have a database set up just yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run PHP artisan migrate. Now what this does is it gives us the option of creating a SQLite database so that we don't have to worry about that. We can just say yes, and now our database is ready to go. So I was to hit register and create a new user. then we're ready. So I'm just going to say that just so it's easier to just log in the future. But yeah, we're ready to go. We have a user, we have a dashboard, we have things that are just kind of ready to go for us. And we are, it's been what, 8 minutes? Yeah, so it's pretty great to be able to have something like this ready to go out of the box for us without having to do too much work. But yeah, let's set up a GitHub repo and let's get going. So let's go ahead. I'm going to log in into GitHub. All right. Now I usually have the GitHub CLI up and ready to go, but the logging in is going to be the easiest just because so we can kind of just do it all from scratch. That way I'm not taking any shortcuts to make this video shorter or anything like that. I want to make sure that we kind of give it its due justice of saying, hey, this is what it takes to create an application, get it published and ready to go. So I'm just going to create a new repo. We're going to make it public and we'll call it send notes. Let's see. Looks like it's stalling on us real quick. There we go. So send notes. Awesome. A way to send scheduled notes to your friend. There we go. Public and create repository. So now let's just get this ready, get this out of the gate, push an existing repository. Go ahead and copy that and we'll push this in. Okay, we should be ready to go. Awesome. There it is. There's our Laravel Breeze application ready to go with PHP Artisan. Okay, now let's deploy this. I like to deploy as early as possible just to make sure that everything that we have within this application is doable, and that way we can set up some CI and CD to make this a little bit easier for us, in the sense that anytime we push a commit to this repo, this send notes repo, we'll be able to just see those changes live on fly.io. So let's go ahead and let's do that. So I'm just going to log into Fly right here. And I believe I'm signed into GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. And if you don't have a fly.io account, I would recommend creating one. I think it's an easy way to get up and running. So let's just go ahead and see how we do this. So I know that Fly has a great kind of documentation for Laravel. So let's just go ahead and build this out. So I know that you can install the Fly CTL CLI. That's the easiest way to do this because I'm already logged in, I'm ready to go. And then we just run fly launch in our repo. So let's go ahead and do that. Fly launch. Awesome. So I detected a Laravel app. It has, send notes derived from the directory name. LA. Most apps need 1 GB of RAM. We'll create a Postgres database later, just to kind of have that ready. But so first off, we'll just say, do you want to tweak these settings before proceeding? Let's actually see if, I don't think we have to do anything just yet. So let's go ahead and say no. Awesome. So it's kind of building it out for us. I know they recommended fly launch. If we ask to deploy now, we'll say no, and then we'll add some variables to our fly.toml file. We'll add any secrets that you have can be added here. And then we'll go ahead and create a Postgres database, so that way we can just be logged in and ready to go within fly.io as well. So let's see how this is running. But when we log into Postgres is what we'll kind of attach it to. So I'll kind of speed this up a little bit, so that way we're not waiting too much. Awesome. So it's deployed, and we should be able to just open this link and be ready to see our application. And there it is. Now we're not going to be able to log in because we haven't yet set up the Postgres database. So let's go ahead and do that now. So Laravel and Postgres. So first we're going to attach a Postgres. I believe we have to create it first. So let's go ahead and do that. To run Yeah, so let's go ahead and follow the guide here to create it. We're just going to say fly postgres create. Let's take that command and plop it in here. And we're just going to say this is send notes. We'll just say PG. I'm going to put it in LAX because that's where my application is running as well. And then let's see, we'll just say development. And we're going to scale it down. So fly.io has the ability of saying, okay, after 1 hour of no connections, let's scale it to 0. And we'll say yes. Awesome. So we have a Postgres database within our fly.io account. So let's go ahead and connect it. So if we go back to this application, we'll be able to connect Postgres to our Laravel application. So let's go ahead and do that. And I already had a Postgres database connected to my fly.io account. So you should only need one. I have 2 running now, but you should only need one. So let's go ahead and connect it. Looks like I have an error. Let's see. So fly Postgres attached. Let's see what this gives us again. I know it threw an error last time, but let's see. Okay, yeah, so it accepts 1 arg0 received. Postgres attached, so we should give it the Postgres app name. So I believe if we did send notes -pg, so we should be able to. Perfect. Yeah. So we Postgres cluster send notes to PG is now attached to send notes. Perfect. And I'm going to delete this, so don't try to connect to the database because I'm going to delete all this after this video. Gotcha. Sweet. Now, one of the things I want to kind of point out is, you have Laravel herd and you have the fly CLI. But one of the things that I think helps with being able to have these kind of features is there is the tall stack package, which kind of includes everything that you might need for within VS Code. Now, if you're using like PHP Storm or Vim or whatever you're doing, you're probably smarter than I am, so you'll be able to know which extensions you need. But this gives you IntelliSense for both Laravel, IntelliSense for Livewire, Alpine, and then Tailwind, and then also PHP IntelliFence, which is going to be code intelligence within PHP. So those are the 2 that I would kind of recommend. I have a few others, but those are the 2 that do the heavy work, I should say. So let's go ahead and look into our fly toml. And here we go. So we have, we have our app send notes, and then we have some of our environment variables, and then we have the HTTP service. I believe it recommended adding something else, so app URL. So let's go ahead and add that. And since we know that this is going to was send notes.fly.dev, let's take a look, make sure we're doing everything here, make sure the fly toml Laravel app uses Postgres. Okay, so let's go ahead and go here. I believe this is sent in the env. Okay, so perfect. Yeah, we don't need this. Awesome. And then we've already connected. Perfect. So we should be able to run fly. I believe it's called fly launch, fly deploy. And then we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and run that. But first, let's go ahead and take a look at our GitHub. And we probably don't want to run this fly toml file. Actually, we might be safe because let's take a look. We're not actually saving any kind of like sensitive information here. So let's go ahead and let's just commit it. So we'll say git and all. We'll say this is prep for fly launch. Awesome. And we'll go ahead and push it. We'll go ahead and set up GitHub CI/CD to fly after we kind of set up this Postgres database, but we'll go ahead and fly deploy just to make sure that everything is ready to go for the Postgres database. Now, if we were to take a look at our fly dashboard here, we should see a new application kind of ready to go. And if I was to take a look at apps, you kind of see I have a few other things, but this is send notes Postgres database and then the send notes application. And basically the send notes application gives you two machines to say, hey, you know, that way it's kind of has a little backup, but it's running two machines connected to one Postgres database. And Fly is great because it has the ability of using SQLite if you would like, or just running an application in the cloud using Postgres. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's running. Looks like everything's good to go, and let's go ahead and check. So let's go ahead and register. We'll say Siri, and we'll log in. And we get a server error. So let's go ahead and see what's happening in our dashboard. The cool thing with Fly.io is actually gives you monitoring kind of out the gate. So we should be able to see, yeah, there's no table. Okay, there we go. So the great part about Laravel is we haven't actually migrated anything in the application. Now, what we could do if we were to go to Laravel's Fly's documentation is this post deployment tab. We could, SSH into the console, and then we could run our PHP artisan migrate, which is basically the command within Laravel to take all of the migration files that you have, and we'll go ahead and take a look at that. So we have these migration files in the database here. We have create users, create password, create failed jobs, create personal access tokens. This is given to us out of the box within Laravel Breeze. So when I ran that PHP artisan migrate a little bit ago locally, it created a SQLite database for us with everything kind of set up. So anytime we create a new migration, a new file to add something to the database, we can run PHP artisan migrate, and that's just going to keep the database in sync with the files that we've created. So we ran that locally, but we haven't actually ran that, in Fly.io yet. So if I was to take a look, and let's see, post deployment right here. So if I was to take a look, I know that Laravel database migration. There we go. So we can definitely SSH into it and run PHP artisan migrate, or there's a deploy release command, which is basically, that's going to be the easiest way. So let's go ahead and do that. So if we are going to go into our VS Code and we go into our Fly TOML, there's a deploy. I don't think we're having a deploy command yet, so we'll go ahead and add this here. And there we go. So let's go ahead and send this up to Fly. And what we'll be able to do is Fly deploy. And what this should do is allow us to run that migration so that, yes, we were already connected to the database that we set up, but now the database actually has the tables that we need to run Laravel Breeze. Awesome. Now we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and head back to our send notes application and let's register. Josh. Bam. Awesome. We're good to go. So let's go ahead and push this git commit. So we're ready to go. We have Laravel Breeze up and we are running on fly.dev. So things are starting to look pretty good. So let's go ahead and make sure we commit this. We'll say this is post deploy commands. or migration. There. Okay, now we are ready to start building this application. And one of the first things that I love to do when I'm starting to think through, okay, how are we building this application? What are the things we need? The first things I like to think through is, what does the application need to do? So that way I can run as few migrations as possible. Because one of the things when you think through how your database is set up, what you actually need to, have prepared for when you're building this out, it helps to kind of have an overarching sense of, what does the application need to do? What are the things I need to look out for? And then what does the database structure and the application process look like? So let's go ahead and create a new note just to kind of like put everything out on paper. So we'll say this is the send notes tall stack. Perfect. So what should this application do? So first of all, it should allow users to log in and create accounts. And the great part is that's kind of already been, like set up for us with their little breeze. Next, users should be, or we'll say users can type up notes and save them. Okay, so that lets us know that there should be a way to save notes. Let's see, notes will be sent publicly via email to view. And then the receiver can heart a note that's sent. Okay, so this kind of tells us that the structure of what the database should look like, and just like what we need to keep in mind as we're sending this, because we need to have things that aren't accessible or are accessible even if you're not logged in. We need to have things that are only accessible if you're logged in, only if you're a particular user. And that's what I like to think of through as well. It's like, what are the things we need to keep in mind? Security aspect. So like, what should we keep in mind? Well, in terms of security, users can't view other people's notes. They should only be able to view theirs. That's kind of security in a nutshell, that you should only be able to view what you're allowed to view. And then notes should only be notes should probably have a way to be public, I think. So if you're sending them, you probably are already making them public, but maybe we don't have them be public until they're sent. Then we can mark them as public, just in case. What if you want to, create a note create a note and view it, or there should be a way to view notes only if they're public. And then maybe the last thing to kind of keep in mind, I would say, is that we want to make sure that these notes aren't easily, there's not an easy way to kind of try to view a note that isn't related to you. So notes should be as secure as possible for public facing notes. Now, we can't tighten this up too much unless you want to have the viewers who are viewing this be able to log in via email and then view this note. But one of the things we can do is use WUI-Ds. Now, this is a great way to say, okay, instead of my note being note number 3 and I'm sending to someone, it's going to be note number 003-FD- whatever. So that way, it's a lot harder to guess, what is someone else's note that they might have sent privately in some way to someone else. Yes, these notes are still able to be accessed by anyone, but you would have to have the link. So it makes it a little bit more secure in that aspect. Now, some of the things that we're going to learn, and this is for those who are new to Laravel, those who are new to building out full applications, and those who are not new, who are kind of building this out. These are the things that we're going to try to touch on. We kind of already touched one of the things we are learning. So we already kind of touched that. We already learned like Laravel Breeze, right? That's what we created, and we also have deployed right now. We are going to learn about models, migrations. We saw what was kind of built out for us in Laravel Breeze, but now we're going to create a new migration and do that. We're going to be able to send emails and jobs, background jobs, to be able to send all of those emails, because we can't rely on the server to send them all. What if we have 100 users and we want to send 100 emails all at once? And it's possible, but a background job helps that, so we're not relying just on a cron job. What if we and with this background job, we can also say this is both queues and cron. And then we're going to just learn basic routing as it applies to Laravel. Now, if you're coming from the JavaScript world, we're not going to be doing file-based routing. We're going to be doing PHP, Laravel, kind of standard routing. Now, we're not going to actually touch controllers, just of the way we're going to be building this application. It's going to be a little bit more modern in the sense that we will be using single file components and using the majority of that to send data to our application, of retrieving data and then also pushing data into our application. And then also we'll probably just touch on that. We'll look at policies. So this is the security aspect. Who can view a note? And then lastly, Livewire Vault. So this is that single page components. This is going to be really familiar to people who are used to JavaScript files, whether that's Vue or React Server components, where you kind of have your server, hey, I'm querying in the database, or I'm pushing data to the database in the same file that I have my view layer. And I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, let's go ahead and start building. So users can type up notes and save them. So what that means is we're going to create a new migration and create a note for that migration. Now, what this is doing is we need a way to save notes to the database. Now, if you haven't worked with an MVC architecture before, model view controller, this is kind of a brief look into it. Now we're really only be touching like the model and view part, and I'll throw migrations into that as well. But let's go ahead and go to our terminal. Now, here's the command that Laravel kind of gives you. It's PHP artisan, and then we have a whole bunch of different things that we can run after that. We're not getting into all of them, but PHP artisan make, and we're going to make a model. Now we're going to make a model of a note. So when we make our model, the wording, how we word the model is going to be in the singular. So note instead of notes, but the migration is going to always be in plural. And so Laravel actually does this out of the box for you. -M is going to be migration. So we're just saying, hey, we're going to make a model of a note. So that way we can store like the methods that we need in that model. And then we're just going to create a migration with it so that we can add this to our database. Of course, you can do all this separately. You could say make migration, add notes column, and there's a whole bunch of different standards that Laravel kind of expects, or that's just kind of best practice. But I like to start with make model, and there's other things that you can kind of add on in this dash command. You can add a factory to create notes for you. You can add a controller or a resource controller, and we're not going to touch those today. But so let's just go ahead and create a note model and then create a migration with it. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and go into our VS Code and let's take a look at what was created. So we have our database migrations, just create notes table. And then we have our app models note. And we can see here in our user that it kind of has a couple different things. It has this protected fillable method. That just means that, okay, anything in here can be filled in by the user at some point in our application. It's available to be filled in. We have our hidden, so this is things that are never going to be displayed to the user in any way, shape, or form. And then these are just cast specific to the model within the database model. And so we have our node, it's blank right here, but we're going to first create the migration for that node. So let's go ahead and create notes. And we kind of already thought through, like, okay, what do you need within a notes? Well, you first probably are going to need a string of, we'll just say this is, let's say subject. We can call this, and we'll call it title. So if you're sending a note to someone, yes, you have a subject, but we'll just say title so that way we can display it and call it title for that. And then we're going to say that we need a body. So we'll say, and actually for this, we'll use text. So text is going to be like a long form. And we'll say this is the body of the note. And we'll have a date. And we'll have this be a send date. And we'll make this, we don't need to make it nullable. I was going to say we can make it nullable just in case like you're not sending it or kind of just saving it and maybe you want to send it at a later date. But the purpose of this node is to be able to send it to someone. So you can pick a date. And then we'll probably have a Boolean of is published. And we'll kind of set this to default of false. And then we'll go ahead and create an integer. And we'll have this be heart count. So this is what, I'll actually have that default to 0. So the premise of this is being able to say, okay, we have a title, we have a body, we have a send date. We have the ability to make sure a note is published or not. And I think this is kind of, standard practice within Laravel applications and maybe just within database applications in general is the is preface to, we can technically just call this published. If it's published, it's false. If it's published, it's true, but we'll just say is published. And then Laravel gives you timestamps and ID out of the box. Now we did say that we're going to change this to UUID, so that way it's a little bit more security focused. So we'll just say UUID, and we don't have to change anything else. That kind of just gives us everything we need. In our model, we can say that this has UUIDs. And that's it. That's all we need to do. So that way, the next time a node is created, it creates it based off of UUID. Now, let's go ahead and go into our terminal, and we'll go ahead and run PHP artisan migrate. Now, again, that's to basically sync the database with the changes that we made in these migration files. And we have a notes table. And one of the things I like to do is, if you come from the JavaScript world, you're used to something like Prisma Studio or Drizzle Studio or whatever. Yeah, your preface, your personal studio table editor of choice. And since we're working just with SQLite databases, we just can use something like a GUI for reading database files. And I'm just going to use Table Plus because that's the thing that I'm most familiar with. So let's just go ahead and grab that out. So if I opened Table Plus, what I'll be able to do is, let me just do this on a different screen. And I'm going to open up SQLite database. I'm going to, we'll call this send notes. We can select a specific file. And in this database, we're just going to say that this is for send notes and database.sqlite. Open it up, connect, and we are good to go. So you can see here that we have a note, UUID, title, body. These are all the tables, the columns that we created within our application. Now, one of the ways that we could definitely just enter all of this manually if we want to, but let's just go ahead and just leave this for now. I'm not too concerned about creating something out of the box, but we could give it a title. We could say, first note. This is my first note. We'll say this is, 12/02/23, default of false, default. Okay, now if we save this, notes.uuid. Okay, I was having some issues creating a new note because, silly me, I did not add the ID name to this migration. So we didn't actually have an ID in our database column. So what we can do now is we can exit this out. We can run PHP artisan. First, we're going to roll back. That basically is just going to delete the create notes table. And then we're just going to run PHP artisan migrate again. And now we have a new notes table. Now we can run a database query to kind of input this in. We could also create a factory, which is basically a way to seed the database. But for now, I'm just going to use something called Laravel Tinker. And that's basically just kind of a CLI command that kind of gives you out of the box. And we're basically just going to create a new note using the CLI. If we were to run PHP artisan Tinker, now we can run note equals new and now we have note title equals first note. We have a note body equals, we have note send date equals, and then we have is published in integer is already new, so we'll just go call note save. Perfect. So if we were to open up our database, our table plus, which kind of has our send notes database, if I was to pull this over and look into notes, we should have a first note. There we go. Because I actually identified that UUID table as ID, we actually have a UUID ready to go. So I could modify any of this and we would be able to query this from anywhere in the database. So we have is published to 1. We could set our hard count to 24. All of this is modifiable and ready to go. But before we do that, we need to make it modifiable in our application as well. So we probably won't actually open up Table Plus that much anymore because primarily anything that we're going to be doing with the database, we're just going to do in Laravel and Livewire on our view. And basically, that's usually what you're used to within a JavaScript application, for example. So if I was to open up this note model, we have protected fillable. This basically says, okay, hey, any of these, fields within the application are able to be filled, and and we don't have any of this, so we don't need to make it like that. But it's a way of kind of making sure that only things that you want entered into the database or changed or updated or created are done there. But there's another way you could do this. We could do protected guarded. And basically what that means is if we have this kind of set, then anything can be filled unless we put it in here. So protected guarded ID. We don't want someone updating their ID, but everything else should be ready to go. Now, we forgot one last thing before we kind of push this up into the database and kind of just have our everything ready. We're actually going to roll back that database. Again, PHP artisan migrate rollback, because we forgot one thing. We need to make sure these notes are associated to a user. Now, in the create notes table, we're just going to modify this, and we could create a new migration and kind of add this column. But because we haven't actually started publishing any data into it, it's not live, we're just going to do this in the old migration. So we can add a foreign ID, and we can say that that's for user ID, and constrain basically just means that hey, the user ID is going to be linked to ID of this note. So it just makes it a lot easier. We don't have to create we don't have to create a user ID, a column or anything like that. It just does the connection for us. And we can also just call cascade on delete. Basically, that just means, hey, if the notes, or if a user was to be deleted, let's delete all their notes as well. And there, that just gives us everything out of the box, so that if we were to, let's go ahead and just say phprs and migrate again, then we're creating the notes table. Perfect. And let's go ahead into our notes model. Now, here's where we can start to call pretty cool methods. And we can basically want to say that, okay, GitHub Copilot is already kind of doing our job for us. Public function user, we just say, hey, this belongs to a particular user. And then in our user model, we can do the same thing. We can say public function notes, return this has many notes. And that's it. So if we were in our code, if we were in our Livewire single file components, and we'll get to there in a little bit, we could say, okay, whoever is and Laravel has awesome functions for this. If whoever's the auth user, so whoever's the logged in user, we can get all of their notes just like this. Notes, and then that way we can kind of grab all of the notes and loop through them, or we could say, auth user or auth user note notes create, and then all of a sudden we have the ability to create a note that's linked to this user without having to manually fill in the user ID of whoever's logged in. And we can do the same thing of like, okay, if we have a note, what if we want to grab the user's name associated to that note? Well, we could just do, note, or we could, like if we have the note being passed in via this ID, we could say, the note user, and we could say name. And all of a sudden we have, whoever that name is, what's associated to that particular note. So this just gives us a lot of cool functionality out of the box. And that's basically what models are for. Not only are you kind of calling your particular, the abilities that you have within a model. And this is something that, it's different for us JavaScript developers or people who, who came from the JavaScript world. Because a lot of times you didn't really have the need to have a model. It just kind of lived in your code. It was state that was managed by your code or by your database, and it was kind of just in limbo. And within models in this model view controller aspect, you have the ability to kind of say, okay, I want to create these new functions just to make it easier for me. Like if I was saying, okay, like if I wanted to say like public function, published notes, and I wanted to just get all the notes from a particular user. Let's say if I want to say that this belonged to a user, then I could say, okay, GitHub Copilot's making this easy, but if return all the notes where the user ID is related to the user I'm passing in, and only the ones that are published. And it just makes it a lot easier. So you're not having to write stuff like this, these methods over and over again. You just put them in your models. So that way you're kind of keeping it all in one place. I do the same a lot for almost every single application that I build. If I go into users, I say, like public function super user or admin or whatever that might be. And I can return a particular user that is within an array of emails. That way I can say, okay, I only have one place where I need to change that code, but anywhere in my application where only super admins can make this change, now it's automatically changed. I don't have to search and replace every single aspect of my code. Okay, we created the user, we created the notes table. Let's just go ahead and start building. And before we get into that, we're just going to do one more thing. We're going to go into our notes. So we kind of we'll do this. So we'll just say we created created the models and migration. So we're ready for users to do this, to type up notes and save them. But now we're going to get started on the views aspect. And before we get into that, I want to start installing WIREUI, and this is mostly just so that we have an easy way of scaffolding out buttons and form fields and everything like that without having to manually specify them within Tailwind CSS. And we already have Tailwind installed into this dashboard. So if we were to go into our dashboard.blade.php, this is just, if you're not familiar with Blade, it's basically just a template language where we can say anything here. We could say, you know, H1, hi there, folks. And this just has Tailwind already built in for us. So we could say, you know, text for Excel. And then if I were to go into our, if I was to go into our send notes.test and dashboard, there we go. But let's go ahead and install WIREUI. So we'll go ahead and type in that composer, require WIREUI, and this is basically, again, that's just a component library to make things easier. It gives us things like buttons and inputs, stuff like that. And if you wanted to, we have Laravel Breeze kind of gives us components out of the box for things like buttons and inputs and stuff like that. I'm not as familiar with them and how to use it as I am with something like WIREUI, so I'm just faster, and it's something that I prefer. We'll get into all of these views folder structures here in a little bit, but first I wanted to just kind of finish installing this. So we have WIREUI. We're just going to add the WIREUI tag on the page head. And this is where we can talk a little bit about what these files are. So we have views. If we were to go into our routes web, this kind of just says what views are being displayed. So we have a dashboard, and that is giving us anytime anybody accesses /dashboard, we're going to give the dashboard view. We're making sure that the middleware is auth and they're verified. The email address is verified. And we're just having the name of dashboard, that way we can use it in our application. Same thing with profile. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but is that all the, you know, that's where all the routing is right now. So if we were to go into dashboard, you know, this is the views dashboard.blade.php. That's what's being called right here. And then we have our Livewire pages, and these are basically what the Volt single file components that we kind of installed and chose when we chose Laravel Breeze. We have welcome navigation. We have our profile. So if we were to go into our profile.blade.php, you can see here that we have specific Livewire components. You can think of these as React components in a Blade, a templatized template. So we have, you know, looks like 3 different React components here. Not React, but Livewire single file components. So we have profile, update profile. And here we have, you know, our Blade component, our Livewire component. So this is all server code. And then down here, we'll have specific views related to that code. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out just one more, just to make it a little bit easier. And then we have, you know, a layout, which is, this is where we're going to add, this is a navigation layout. And then we have layouts for both our application as well as guests. So the guest is going to be people who aren't logged in. This is the layout, default layout for any view that we create that is not application. And we can actually call that no matter what. So you can see here we have dashboard view, we have x-app layout. Okay, that just means that we're using the app layout, where if we were to look at welcome, this would be using okay, it looks like nothing is using that guest layout, but actually I believe the auth is using it. So I don't think we see yeah, there we go. Login you can see, okay, here we go. Yes, layouts.get. So this is just saying, hey, any login pages are going to be using this guest layout, and we can create any new layout that we want here. But basically what we're just, all of that to say, with this WIREUI that we needed to kind of add, we need to add it to our layout page. And since we're going to be using this across both, let's just go ahead and add it to our application layout, and then as well as the welcome page. So app layout, I'm just going to add that right in there. WIREUI scripts. Okay. Perfect. And then we need to add a couple things to Tailwind. So Tailwind config. We need to add this content, and then we also need to add require for presets. And it looks like that we have presets, so I'm just going to grab this because I don't have any presets yet, and then we should be good to go. Now there's one more thing, and this is just because we're using Laravel Breeze, is we need to publish some config files, because Laravel Breeze gives us a drop-down component and WIREUI gives us a drop-down component, and they clash. So if we go and we're just going to copy this, this is just basically to publish a file to config so we can change those file names. So I'm just going to do it in this terminal right here. Perfect. WIREUI config, and this is basically just saying, if you were to look up here in the views folder, we have components, and then we have a dropdown.blade.php. Anything in a components folder, you can start typing x-dropdown, and that just gives you that whole component. But because there's a dropdown in WIREUI, those aliases are the same and then they clash. So what we're just going to do is we're going to call this WUI for WIREUI-dropdown. So if we were to call x-WI-dropdown, that's the WIREUI version. If we were to just call x-dropdown, that's the Blade, or that's the Breeze version. And then we should be good to go because we don't have anything else that kind of conflicts. All of these are kind of, you know, just ready to go out of the box. So if we were to go into our dashboard, and if we were to create a new button, and let's just say button primary, and we're just going to say, hi there. It's going to be an X button. And that's a component component naming. And because we're using WIREUI, it's going to give us WIREUI component. And if we were to go into our dashboard page, there we go. Hi there. Perfect. Now let's make a few changes to color-wise before we color-wise and like theme-wise. And we're going to add a icon to change this up. Laravel Breeze gives us an easy way of kind of changing that up. So I have a note sharing kind of icon. We're going to change some of the colors so that anytime we call primary, we'll call the rows colors. Let's go ahead and do that right now. So we can actually all do that in the Tailwind config. So we can call theme. I believe it's, let's see. So if we were to go into WIREUI, and we're just going to go into colors. Yeah, it looks like we can do extend the theme and then colors. So theme, extend, colors, and we'll do primary is, and it looks like we can do colors dot, we'll just do colors dot rows. And there we go. So that way, if we were to look at our button again, most of this color is not defined. Okay. There we go. If we were to look at our button again, there we go. Now we have a button that is ready to go. That way we have, you know, we can just call our primary color and we have a button with our primary. So let's go ahead and take a look at adding that logo mark. That way we have a little bit more stylistic choices out of the box. So I'm going to grab that color really quick. So I'm going to grab this SVG OMG. We're going to grab this, and I believe we need to prefer view boxed with height. And we're just going to copy that. Let's go into our logo, application logo.blade.php. Just going to copy this in, and I'm just going to change a couple of things. So basically we just need to add this attributes file. So this is basically just saying anytime we're calling this application logo component, we're going to pass in some attributes dynamically, and that should be good to go. So if we were to save that and go back into our file, there we go. We have this ready to go, and it's a little bit bigger than we want. If we were to log out and log in, we have this here. So it looks decent, but we can go ahead and make that change a little bit. So we can have the navigation link, and so this is the navigation link for the Livewire. We can see that the application logo is here. It has an H9. Why don't we put this as an H5 and see what that does? A little bit small. H7. We'll call it even. Do an H6. That looks a little better. Perfect. Okay, now we are ready to start adding our notes. And actually, before that, why don't we make our landing page a little better? So when we log out, this is fine, but let's just go ahead and make it so that it looks a little bit more like a landing page. And so let's just go into that. If we were to look into our routes of what's actually being shown here, we can see that this view slash is going to the welcome blade.php. If we were to go into our welcome, this is all, you know, the stuff that we have. So why don't we just like remove everything in the body? Actually, let's keep this, and maybe we'll remove everything below that. So if we were to just grab all this out, and okay, yeah, we have this div and this body. Okay, we're good to go there, and maybe we'll just, you know, have another div, and we'll call this, you know, P6 MX Auto, max width 7XL, large PG8. Okay, so we'll say P6 MX Auto, max width 7XL, large will max the not PG, the padding a little bit more, and then we'll go, let's just add our X application logo. We'll have a class that's a width of 24, height of 24, fill current, and then text primary. And then we'll just have an X button of primary. We'll call it XL, href equals route. Say log, and we'll say register. So this will be, okay, if someone just landing on this page, they can get started. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Okay. decent, but we need to center this and maybe like change some padding up here. So we'll say text center. There we go. I think we actually need to do items center flex. Oops. Item center. And then we'll do do a new div here so we can center it. There we go. There it is. Okay, so flex call, and then CSS is hard. Okay, we'll add some space y of 4. There we go. Okay, that's decent. You know, it took me a little bit just to get that going, but we have a div. We're just centering it and giving some padding and some margin. Then we have that application logo and our button. Perfect. So if we were to register, we have this mark ready to go. If we're to log in, we have this mark, and we have, you know, the application logo there on the left. Okay, we're ready for note sends, or send notes, sorry. Let's add a button up here where we can access the notes that we're creating. So if we were to go into our application, our navigation, we have a Livewire layout navigation. You can see here we have a dashboard page, and then down here is where I believe the mobile menu is. Let's see. Yeah, responsive navigation menu here. So we're going to add 2 links. One in the regular menu. We're just going to copy this, add it. We're going to call this notes. Route of notes, and then active route is notes. This is basically just stuff out of the box. One thing to note is it's calling the href, so we're linking it to a named route of notes, and then we're making this active, and that's just a class that we're passing into this xNavLink component that's already been built out for us. Wire navigate, basically just some awesome magic that basically allows you to see the page a lot faster, because it brings up that page on the click instead of the mouse up button. So we have notes, and we're going to do the same thing down here. So we have responsive links of dashboard, and we're going to do that for notes. That way we can see it in mobile as well. Request route is notes. So if we're to go back, we actually are going to get an error because route notes is not defined. And this just gives us some exceptions when we're saying, okay, hey, we named a route of notes in the navigation menu, but that actually doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and create it. So if we were to go into web routes, we're just going to say route. And we actually just copy this and change a couple things. So route view notes. Let's just go to a notes file, and we'll keep middleware auth, and we'll name this notes. So now we should have that notes app accessible. If we're to click on it, we'll get another error. There's no view. So let's create the view. Awesome. So we have a view here for dashboard profile. Let's go ahead and copy the dashboard, just duplicate this, and we'll just call this view, or sorry, notes.blade.php. And actually, since we're going to do a little bit more within notes, because we're going to need a notes create, notes edit file. So why don't we just make this a little easier, and actually let's create a notes folder. So what we can do is in our views, we create a new folder, notes. Then we're just going to create a new file of, call this index.blade.php. So that way we have notes index. Let's go ahead and copy things in the dashboard just to make it a little bit easier. We'll change this to notes. We'll say, hi there, notes, in our button. In our web, now instead of just notes, we need notes dot index, and let's change the name to notes index as well. So then in our navigation, let's go ahead and change that to notes dot index. And then up here, notes.index. Perfect. So there we go. Look how snappy that is. It's all server rendered, but because of Laravel Livewire, it just makes it easy. Awesome. Now we're wanting to grab all the notes and display them here. Now we can do that within our application. So we have our notes index, and Laravel gives you a bunch of easy ways to kind of do this. So we could, this is where controllers really come in, but since we're doing a little bit of more modern Laravel with Volt, let's do it the Volt way, but I'm going to just show the different ways of doing it. You can do it with a controller where we're kind of saying, okay, the route view is notes index, and in the index method in a controller, we could pass in all the routes of the given user. You could also pass it in here where you're saying, okay, notes index, and we could call a function where we pass in, specific information where we can say, okay, the notes is the user's notes. We're going to do that for probably another portion of the application where we can just pass that in inline. But here we're just going to use Livewire. And this is where I think it resonates with me from someone who came from, who kind of came from the JavaScript world. I'm like, okay, I just want to, in my file, just say, give me all the notes for the logged in user and do that. And yes, it's not necessarily what Laravel, it might not be like as best of practice, especially within older Laravel, older like model view controller, that kind of thing. But I think it gives you a lot of flexibility, especially just getting up and running without having to worry too much about, okay, where am I passing this information? How am I doing it? So if we were to look at our notes index, you could technically even do something like this. And there's actually a new helper function within the latest version of PHP to make this latest version of Laravel, excuse me. So there's actually a new Blade directive. And what that means is there's some cool things in Blade where you can just say this at if else at auth, which basically means like, okay, if there's someone logged in, then we say, hey, you're logged in. Then there's so many different helper functions that Laravel just provides out of the box, and it's all server rendered stuff. And they even gives you this before you would use at PHP, and you could just write any kind of PHP here. So notes equals notes all, and we could say, like at models notes all where user ID is auth ID, and then we could in here we could for each notes as note, and then we could give let's just say let's cut all this out so that way we can just easier. I'm just making this just for an example of this is something that you can do. You don't even have to use JavaScript. This is just all PHP, and this should theoretically work. Like, do we have any notes? I think because we migrated back, we don't actually have a note. So if we were to go into we don't have any notes specific for this user. So if we were to go into PHP Artisan Tinker, I'm not a Tinker expert, so I would just say, okay, help write a way to create a new note associated with user with ID of 1. Now, Tinker is just a way to kind of interact with the database without having to write manual SQL queries. I'm not that smart. So basically we could say, okay, yeah, there we go. User equals apps /model/user find one, and then we can say so user equals app models user find one. Perfect. And then we can say note equals new app/models/note. And then we have, note. We could do this, I believe. Okay. I should have associated with the user. So if we were to go back into it, there we go. Awesome. So again, that was a lot of finagling just to show that, okay, you could do this all within PHP. But what if we could do this with a little bit more performance aspect and having to have a little bit more interactivity? And that's what Livewire provides. So let's just go ahead and remove all this. And instead of looping to the notes here, we're just going to create a new Livewire component. And we can do that within the terminal. We can just say PHP artisan make Livewire, or sorry, we're going to make a Volt component. And we're going to call this, let's call it, we'll say notes/show notes. We're going to pass in a parameter of -- class. This is just saying we want to be, this scaffold us out a class-based Volt component. Perfect. So you can see here to create a new folder with the show notes template-php. And again, what this Livewire is basically, it's just a separate component, but it has more interactivity, and then we can place it anywhere in our files, in our blade views. So if I was to say Livewire notes.show notes, I was to do this, and here let's just echo out and say hi there. Back here we have hi there. But this is being rendered in a different place. We have this show notes file, but in notes index, that's where it's being shown. Awesome. So let's go ahead and just start writing this show notes file. And let's just start off with looping through the notes like we were doing before. And this is where we're going to get a little bit into, now what Livewire is. This is basically just saying, hey, we have the ability to connect our PHP, our server components, our server rendered actions, forms, everything like that directly to the view without having to do any kind of post request. It's just all Ajax that is magically delivered to us without having to do hardly anything. So we're just going to say one of the things that Livewire kind of gives out of the box is the ability to say public function with. Now we can return an array here, but basically we're just going to return specific information that we can then manipulate and view here. So if I was to say here, and if I was to show title, we would be able to see, this title in the page. Oh, Oh, there we go. There we go. We'll be able to see this title because now we have this, this variable, this PHP variable of a title that we're passing in to this component. And of course we can modify this and be able to pass this back in to the component. And that's pretty cool, huh? We have live hot module reloading out of the box for us. Okay, but what if we need to pass in all of the user's notes? We just need to pass everything in, and we can do that. That's what this with function that is given to us is allows. So we can return, and we're going to say return notes. And we're going to say that this is auth, and this is a helper function that we get. We're just saying whoever is logged in, that's the auth user. And we're just going to get their notes. And we're going to order it by send date. So that way we kind of are able to see, okay, which notes are like being sent next. We'll order it by sending, and then we're going to just get them all. And this is just Laravel's ORM. It's eloquent is what the name of the ORM, and it is eloquent, by the way. So that makes it a lot easier to think through. But yeah, it's just basically an easy way to interact with our database, and I think it's pretty readable. Grab the specific user who's logged in, grab their notes, order them by the specific send date of when those notes are being sent, and then let's get them all. This is where we can pass in that information now because we have all the notes and all the parameters. So if I was to say, this is where we can do the for each loop. So we have for each notes as note, and just to kind of make this a little bit easier, we're just going to do note title. Okay, so if we were to look back into our table plus and pull this back up, we can see here that in our notes we have this first hello. So if I was to modify this, hello world, and save it, perfect. Awesome. Everything is ready to go. We're displaying this. So if I was to modify this and paste this in, and of course, it's harder with UIDs to automatically make it easier. But then we have 2, and then we'll have another one of another ID. Okay, we have 3. Now let's just go and make this a little bit prettier. And we'll say, perfect. Just a simple of, okay, hey, we have stuff in the database. Now we're displaying it on the screen. This is where we can write a lot of Blade, but because we're using WIREUI, it's going to make it a little bit easier to do out of the box. So we're just going to say, okay, for each note says note, let's actually make this, a div, and we'll do a div here, and we'll just say for each notes, first we're going to do a div, and we'll just say classes, flex, and actually, let's make this a little like a card kind of thing. So actually, we might have the x-card component available to us. So let's see what that looks like. And then we have, and Livewire gives you this wire key initiative, which is basically just saying, hey, let's make this a little bit. It's like passing in a key to a map in React, for example. And let's just say, this is a div of class flex justify between, and we'll just say for now, we'll just say age equals that class equals text XL, font bold, hover underline, hover text blue 500, and this will be the note title. Just save this real quick. Okay, perfect. Actually, we need this. So we have X card. Okay, yeah, we need a div here. There we go. So each card, and we'll space these out a little bit. So class equals space x2, oops, space y2. There we go. So we got some cards. We got hover links, and we got the name of them. If we were to also say we want to pass in. Okay, when is this being sent? So div class. We'll just say this is extra small. And the cool thing is here we can actually use Livewire, and look at that. Send date, format date, month, year. Okay, we're formatting on a string, so what we can actually do here is we can parse this with Laravel's Carbon, which is basically like a date function that it provides out of the box. So we can just say carbon parse. We'll pass in notes, send date, and then we can format it to month, date, year. Okay, there we go. This is when it's being sent. Okay, so that's starting to look a little better, but let's actually make these look like cards. So we're gonna wrap these in a div with a class of grid, and we'll say grid columns is 2 with a gap of 4, and we'll just say some margin on the top, because I think eventually we'll add a space to be able to create notes here as well. So let's wrap that up. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's starting to take place a little bit better. Let's go ahead and I think what we should do is we should add who these notes are being sent to, as well as, maybe just some button to be able to, so far we have like editable buttons to be able to click on this, and this would eventually go to where this can be edited. But let's have a button to be able to like view the public facing page, as well as maybe a button to delete it. And of course we haven't created those yet, but what we can do is just kind of set this all up so that when we do create them, we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and let's say, down here we have another div, like in this card, we have a div of a class of flex items and justify between, so that way we can have a little bit of space up on top. And we'll go ahead and have here be make it be a little bit extra small, and we'll say this is the recipient. So, and span of class equals, let's just say font semi-bold maybe, and then we'll go a note recipient. And actually we don't need to have a name, because I think we'll just send the email. And it occurs to me that I don't believe we set up a recipient in the migration, so we might have to actually add that. So let's go ahead and check for that. And then we'll go ahead and we don't have a closing div, so we'll go ahead and add that. Okay, that's starting to look a little better. And then maybe we'll also have here, we'll have a div to have a couple buttons. So let's just say this is an X button, and this is something that we have within WIREUI. We can say that this is a circle, and we'll just say icon of eye. And then we'll just have another one that is an icon of trash. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, so that way we have something to view and then something to delete eventually. And again, we'll have to close up this div to make these cards look a little better. Okay, that's starting to take shape. I don't know if I like this white background behind the div, so let's go ahead. And I believe that actually comes from the note index. Let's just go ahead and let's just like remove this, and let's just see what that looks like. Okay, yeah, I think that looks a lot better. So now we have this notes where we'll be able to see all the notes that we've kind of created or are kind of queued to be sent. We have some buttons, and we're going to wire up all of this. So let's go ahead and take a look into creating a new migration, because if we take a look at our create notes table, we actually don't have a recipient. So how in Laravel do we add a migration to a previously used table? Well, there's a simple way to do that. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal. So in our terminal, we basically want to add a new column to a previously existing table. In Laravel, we can do that with a flag to add it to a specific table. So we can just say PHP artisan make migration, and we want to add a recipient to notes table. And usually within Laravel, the best practice, I would say, is to say, okay, within a migration name, I want to say the name of the field that I want to add to a table, and then what table it represents. That way it's just easier to scan upon scanning. Okay, this is the migration that adds a recipient field to a notes table. So if we were to look into that, and then we can also just do this -- table equals notes. That kind of tells it to automatically fill that in for us. So if we were to do that, take a look at our recipient to notes table, you can see here that it's automatically associating it to the schema table notes. And then here's where we can just say table string recipient. Now we can't exactly run this migration because we already have notes in the database. We have notes that exist, and we would have to make this nullable so that those wouldn't, have to be. So we would have to make this nullable so that we wouldn't have any issues within our current notes. But what we're just going to do is we're just going to roll back our previous notes and then create some new notes as well. Okay, and then let's also add a drop column so that if we roll back this migration, we know that we're going to remove the recipient from the table. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal, and we'll just say PHP artisan migrate rollback to kind of roll back the last notes. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and migrate again. And there we go. So now we have the recipient added to the notes table. So if we were to pull this up in table plus and take a look at our send notes, we have this recipient column now. So that way we're ready to go. So if we were to take a look back in our show notes Livewire view, this recipient's already ready to go. We're wired up. So now instead of having to use PHP artisan tinker and manually add some notes, why don't we just create a Livewire view to just do that for us? That way we don't have to worry about adding these notes manually, and we can just kind of make sure that we were working with actual real data. Now, of course, we can do this within Blade. We can kind of add a form here, and since actually show notes is a Livewire view, but if I was in the note index within Blade, this isn't anything special. This is just HTML, server rendered HTML. I could add a form And I could do something cool within Laravel where you have this at CSRF, which basically just says, hey, this is a form that's going to push out data, it's going to post to a specific endpoint. But we're in Laravel, so we have the option of making this a lot easier for us. So what we're going to do is actually in our show notes, I want to say that, hey, if there are no notes available, let's show a create notes button to send us to this create notes page. So let's go ahead and wire that up. So it's right here, I'm just going to say if notes is not count, but what we'll do is empty. So basically, if there are no notes that exist within this with array, then we'll show a button. And basically, what this might look like is we'll say div class text center. So that way it's all centered. We'll say no notes yet. Click the button below it. Actually, we'll just say something like let's create your first note to send. Perfect. We'll close out that div. Then we have to say else. So basically, if notes is empty, show this, then else. And we'll actually show a button here as well, like create note. We'll make this primary with icon right of plus. That just tells us within WIREUI, let's make this a little bit prettier using our color that we set up and an icon to the right of this button with a plus. And then else, show this, and then we'll go ahead and say end if. So that should be wired up. Oh, here we go. We'll go send notes. No notes yet. Okay, this button is not this button is not in the spot that we would like it in. So let's go ahead and do, okay, because we did not put this into the text center. And then we'll just go ahead and say that this has a class of MT6 to separate the note. Perfect, no notes yet. Let's create your first note to send. Awesome. So obviously this doesn't go anywhere, but what we can do is wire this to a specific route. So why don't we go ahead and create that route? But what we would say is like we want to send this to, and Livewire has that named route, so we don't have to go /notes/create. We can actually just say what route name is this? Route, and we can say notes.create. And we're actually going to make this wire navigate. So that's where Livewire 3 gives us that ability to kind of navigate to a particular page in a much faster format because it's kind of pulling that info before we even click on the button. Awesome. Routes, note.create is not defined. We knew this. Anytime we call a named route, the note has to be defined in a web routes folder or file. So that's why we'll go ahead and set up. Let's go ahead into our web routes file, and we're just going to, let's just go ahead and copy this, but we want to name this notes/create, notes.create. There we go. Now, within Laravel, one of the ways you could do this is kind of start to group some of these things. You could put them in a controller, or we could just kind of start to group them up so that we know that, hey, these are all the notes. And then we have notes index, notes create. But since we have a simple application, we're just going to do these individually. And it kind of just shows, hey, it's personal preference. It's whatever you feel is best, whatever is easy to kind of look at and scan. A lot of people like to do this, where they'll kind of create a comment and say notes routes, and that way it's easier to scan on a first pass. I just kind of like having them grouped similarly, so we have dashboard profile. I like to have them separated so I can see them a lot easier. But again, personal preference, and you'll find that there are so many ways to do it. And I think that's the beauty of something like Laravel is you have opinions, but then you also have places where it's up to you. So we have notes.create. We need to create this file. Again, like notes index, we have a blade file that's associated with this view. So let's go ahead and create it. Notes. Actually, let's just go ahead and duplicate this index. So we'll say create.blade.php. And since it's in the note folder, that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. We say, hey, create a note. And we'll say this is create a note. Perfect. Now if we're to go back, no notes yet, create note, and there we are. Looks like everything's ready to go. You can see here that it's not active, and that's because we mentioned in the navigation that this is only going to show that active CSS if the request route is notes.index. And that's fine. We don't necessarily want you to be thinking you're on the notes page when you're creating a note, but there should be an easy way to get back, and we can do that later. So let's wire up a form and start to create a note. So we're going to need a Livewire component, and that's since we don't necessarily need too much in this blade view, what we're just going to do is similar to our notes index where we're having these notes.showNotes. Let's go ahead and create a new Livewire component, and we'll do it similar to how we did the last one. So PHP artisan make volt. So we'll do notes / create note, and then we'll do a add of class. Perfect. So if we are to go to our create, let's go ahead and add this in, Livewire notes.create-note. Perfect. Now we can pull up our create note blade, and if we were to just add some text here saying, I'm gonna create a note, everything should be working perfectly fine, the same as we expect it to. We have replaced the create note, and this is being rendered by the Livewire single file component within Volt. So let's go ahead and just kind of set up what fields we need to be able to add a note to this, to our database. So within our class extends, we basically have the ability to set up that state. So we can say public, we have a note subject, or note title is what we called it within the database. And of course, this is just what this is wiring up in the front end. So it's not necessarily need to be specific to what you call in the database, but it just makes it a little bit easier as you're kind of working through these types. We'll say note body. We have a note recipient. And we have a note send date. So when we need to actually send this note. And then we have one function that we'll probably, actually we might have two, but we'll have one function for now, and we just need to submit the form. This is just saying, okay, when we submit a form, what happens here? And just to kind of show you what this might look like, we'll just go ahead and die and dump, and we'll just go ahead and do that. Yeah, we could do something like grab all of the data, but we'll just do it individually by now. And we'll just say something like a form, and let's go ahead. We'll add some styling later, but what we'll do is here we'll go X input, and we'll do a WIREUI note title. Perfect. Let's do a body, and we'll do this of X text area. And we'll have a recipient. And we can, make this an email field later in our validation, but just to kind of show you what this looks like within a Livewire component, since we haven't done any forms yet, we'll do a send date, and actually instead of X input, type date should be fine. And then we'll just have a button to submit. Perfect. And just to show you what this does on form, what we can do and call is basically wire submit equals submit. So basically this is calling that public function submit. It's calling that public submit function. And we don't have to worry about doing any kind of, prevent the default action. Livewire is doing that all for us. And it's grabbing all of this, and since the default for WUI-MODAL within Livewire 3 is anytime a form is submitted, then it syncs that information. So we're syncing the input to note title when this form is submitted. Let's take a look at what this looks like. If I was to hit, of course, what we could do is X button. So that way it looks a little cleaner. Awesome. There we go. We'll make this look a lot nicer in a little bit. We'll say, this is my title. This is my body. It's a funny phrase. We'll just say, this is my email, and we'll have a date picker. And there we go. So we have all of this information just wired up, ready for us to go. So we can do whatever we want with this. And that's the great thing about Laravel and Livewire specifically, especially within these single file components. It just makes it so clean. You don't have to, grab all the data and, make sure that you're calling, okay, anytime this, this is submitted, then we need to keep that state. It just does it for us. This is pretty clean, and it's not that many lines of code. We initiate the state, we wire it up, and then we submit it, and we can do whatever we want with this information. But let's make this a little cleaner. We need to validate this information before we actually push this into the database. And let's just make the classes a little bit cleaner as well. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and say this is a class of space X, space Y of 4. So that way we can kind of separate these a little bit more. Awesome. And then we'll go ahead and say, let's make a placeholder for this one. It's been a great day. And we'll say note title. There we go. Yeah, note. And we might call this a subject, but it's a title. It's a title of what you're sending to the person. And this could be like a label of your note. There we go. And WIREUI gives us all this out of the box, which is great. And then we'll go ahead and say, recipient is a good word for it, but we'll do a placeholder of your friend at email.com. And then we'll go ahead and say that this is a type of email. Let's actually add a icon for this. So we'll say icon equals user, and then this one maybe like icon equals date, I believe. Actually, it might be calendar. There we go. There we go. Looks great. And then with the button within a form, WIREUI has, I actually don't know if it's my fault or not, but I've found that we need to kind of put this into its own div, so that way we can add some class functionality to the button itself, instead of adding it to the button itself. So we can say that this is, we'll say flex with, we don't actually need the flex, so we'll say to a padding top of 4, and then we should be good to go. So we have a little bit more. We'll say that this is a primary button. And we'll say right icon of, we'll say calendar because we're submitting and scheduling this note. Actually, we'll say, yeah, schedule note. And then we'll add a spinner. And basically what this spinner does is anytime we call a submit function within a form, it's going to automatically give us a spinner. So that way we're kind of waiting for the database to receive that information. And then we're just ready to go. So we have a schedule note button. Looks like all of this is looking fairly well. Maybe we'll just add a little placeholder to this to make it look a little cleaner. We'll say, share all your thoughts with your friend. Perfect. Everything's looking fairly nice. So why don't we do the backend? And it's funny because we're just going to be working in the same file. So again, similar to like React server components, or if you're used to working in something like Vue, instead of having to do all of that Ajax requesting or not Ajax, but instead of having to kind of hit an API call, we're just sending this all to the server immediately. It's just an Ajax request that's happening behind the scenes. If I was to inspect this and look at something like the network, we'll go ahead and clear this. What we can do is we'll just say test at test.com, and we'll just send something up. When we hit this, and it's probably because we actually aren't sending anywhere. They're just kind of dying dumping. But basically what we'll do is hit a server using Ajax request. I wasn't recording. Let's go ahead and do that again. There we go. Update. We basically hit this update URL, and you can see here that it throws a server error because we're dying and dumping. But that's basically what it's doing. It's an AJAX request behind the scenes that Livewire gives us out of the box. So let's go ahead and add some validation. So we can actually do this in the submit button, or Livewire gives us, let's actually take a look. So if we were to look at livewire.laravel.com, we're going to look at form property. Laravel actually gives you the ability to create a whole form component, which basically has the ability to add validation out as attributes above a specific field. So instead of having to do it all within your function, we can actually separate this out into its own form method and then be able to validate it separately. But because we're doing a simple app, we're not going to do all of this. We're just going to validate it within the function itself. And that looks like this. We can just call validate, and this is more Laravel than Livewire at this point. We'll say this validate, and we'll say, node titles required, bodies required, recipients required, send date is required, and we can add a little bit more info here as well. So if we wanted to say we can add it as an array. It's required. It is a string, and then we'll say it is a minimum of, let's say, 5 characters. We can do the same thing here, but we'll say this is a minimum of, I don't want to say minimum of like 20 characters. Perfect. For recipient, we'll say it's required. It is an email. And then we'll go ahead and for the note send date, we'll say it's required and it is a date. Awesome. That should be good to go. So instead of just dying and dumping, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a new note. So what we can do is we can say auth user notes create, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of separate all this out. So we'll say, we'll go ahead and close this up. What we can say is note title, and it's not that because we're creating a title. We'll say this is body of note body, recipient of recipient, send date of note send date, and then that should be good to go. But what we'll do is say published is actually equal to true, because we're not saying, okay, this is published, but if they're creating a note, we'll say that's set to publish, and that's actually is published. And then I think we should be good to go. And we don't actually have to set the user ID because we're calling it from the auth user. So what we can do after this, after we submit the form, is we can say, let's actually redirect to /notes, or what we could do is the routes note.index. Again, we're using that named route function. So if we were to look at our form, looks like I have a validation error. I think I have to do this. And this should be the reason why. It is not. Let's have Copilot fix this for us. That's the issue. I was not making an array. I was making an object. So it is an array. Okay, perfect. So we're saying, okay, auth user notes create. And when we create that note, give it a title, body, recipient, send date is published as false. And then we're redirecting the note. Again, there's different ways of doing this. We could say something like, let's use the note model and say, let's create one. And then we could pass in, individually who the user ID is. We could do it that way. This just makes it a little bit cleaner because we're automatically defaulting to use the user itself instead of creating the note and push in the user. So we're going to say the title is test. You can see here that we start to get some validation. And one of the things I like about WIREUI is it gives us that validation out of the box. We can also add this X errors down here. And that's just a neat little component that gives us all of this inline stuff, but also we'll go ahead and refresh this. Gives us all that inline stuff down here as well. So there's 4 errors with your submission. Note field must be at least 5 characters. Same stuff that you get up here, but if you were to have a longer form, it just makes it a lot cleaner. Okay, so we'll say my first note. This is my first note, and I'm glad to show it. Then we'll go ahead and say the recipient is joshsiri@gmail.com, and we'll go ahead and give a send date of tomorrow. There we go. Okay, we have notes in the database. And just to show that this is automatically synced with the user, if I was to log out and let's go ahead and register with a new email, and let's just say Josh Smith. Perfect. We still have the hide there dashboard. We'll go ahead and change that in a little bit. We have notes. There's no new notes. I can't. Now here's the tricky part. Okay, there's no notes, but if I was to go back, and this is where the UUID helps to solve this a little bit. If I was to look at my notes, and we don't have any kind of view page just yet. So the database is only showing the notes that we have associated with our user. Now we'll get into this in a little bit of what a policy is in the sense of we don't want anybody to be able to view or edit our notes just because they don't have access to them on a page. It doesn't mean they can't find the UUID. We make it a little harder with the UUIDs, but you can still have access to it technically. So let's go ahead and add a create note button to this page here. So that way we're not just kind of shooting around in the dark. And actually, let's add it to this show notes file. So instead of, for each notes as note, we're going to do that. But then we're also just going to say that, hey, let's create a new note as well. So else X button. And we'll actually just go ahead and copy what we create up here. So we'll just say, there we go. Create note, and let's make it look a little cleaner. So let's make this look a little cleaner, and we can actually give some padding to all of these cards. So we'll just say the card is margin top of 12. Nope. Let's see. Might actually, looks like we're adding this margin top. I don't think it's actually doing anything. So let's go ahead and just add some margin bottom to this button. There we go. Perfect. So we can create a note, go back to our notes page, and let's actually add a back button, and that's the create notes page. So let's actually clean this up and just say that this is a max width. Let's actually remove this div entirely. So that way we're just showing the create note. Perfect. Actually, let's say it's max width of like 2XL. There we go. Looks nice. Let's go ahead and add a simple back button here. So we'll say X button back, or let's just say all notes. And we'll say X button. Okay, that looks good. What we'll do is we'll show an icon left equals left arrow. And it might be something else. Well, I think it's arrow left. Let's actually take a look. So in WIREUI.com, so in WIREUI and .dev, what we can look at is the buttons, and we need a left arrow. So here we go. Icons. Okay, so it's not icon left. It's just icon. Let's take a look now. There we go. So all notes. We'll just add some, add some space x4 to this. Oh, not x. That's a space of y4. There we go. I actually just might add some margin bottom to this of 12. And there we go. So back to all notes. And of course, this doesn't do anything yet. Actually add 8. And we'll just say that this is href equals route notes.index. Perfect. Bam. And it looks like it doesn't. Okay. href equals. There we go. So all notes, create note, all notes. Perfect. Then we're good to go. So now let's go ahead and wire it up to be able to view a note. So we have the ability to create notes. We can create this note. We did the validation and everything like that. So let's go ahead and view a note. And actually, let's show some of the note text here as well. So if we go to show notes again, we kind of don't have anything to show. Okay, what is in this note? Maybe we want a little bit of the truncated part of the note. That way we can see exactly where this note, what is the contents of the note without having to click into it and edit it. So let's go ahead and, let's say for here, or this is where we are linking to eventually the note to be able to edit it. So here, before this carbon format date, let's go ahead and actually add a string. We'll say this is a paragraph, and we'll say that this is, we can actually call a PHP function here. So string limit note content. I believe we called it body. So let's go ahead and take a look. There we go. Okay, now our flex got messed up a little bit, so we'll go ahead and throw this in a div. Now where we have that. There we go. Looks great. This is my first note, and I'm glad to show it. Everything looks pretty good. So that way we have the ability to click into a note. If we had additional text here, so if I was to, let's actually create a new note. We'll say, it's my second note, and let's just go ahead and create a whole bunch of text. Obviously, there's better ways to do this, but I'm just going to do it this way for now. And we'll add it for there. And there we go. And looks like the truncated of 100 is probably not right. So let's go ahead and let's cut it down to 30. There we go. That looks better. So at least then you know, hey, here's where the note is going. Maybe we'll do, let's do 50 and make this class equals text x extra small, and maybe we'll add a little bit of margin on the top. Okay, so that way it's a little bit cleaner. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Actually, we might add a column of 3, just to make it a little bit cleaner. Looks nice. Awesome. So we know the notes that we have, when they're being sent, who they're being sent to, and the ability to, or at least buttons, to view them and edit them. So before we do any viewing, why don't we create the function or the ability to delete a note? So we should have a new function, public function. We'll call this delete. And pass in a note ID. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, give me the note with this specific note ID. And here we can kind of loop. Since we're already looping through each note, we'll pass in the note ID. And obviously this is where we also want to have some security risk, because we don't want people deleting notes if they know the ID. We want them to only delete notes if they know the ID and it's a note that they have access to. So, but before we do that, we'll just go ahead and say note equals note where ID first. Perfect. So this is within Laravel, we can call it first. There's also an option to call sole. But most people just kind of know first off the gate. And of course, GitHub Copilot knows that as well. I'll just say note delete. Perfect. And again, we'll make sure that this is authorized in a little bit. But for now, if we were to wire this up, we would say the trash is trash button is wire, click equals delete. This is where we actually need to have some double quotes because of what we're going to be passing in. Delete. And then we'll pass in note ID. So that should be good to go. If we were to pass this in, class note not found. We have not imported it. So basically what we need to do is anytime we're trying to access a model like this, we can we have to import it here. So we would use app/models/note. So if we were to refresh this again, there we go. Awesome. Let's create a new one. Perfect. We're rocking and rolling. Let's go ahead and take a look at our notes for the send notes tall stack. So we can cross this off. Users can type up notes and save them. We created the models. We created the migrations. Perfect. Let's start on views. We started on that. We took a look at what a view looks like within Blade and then Livewire specifically. Notes will be sent publicly via email to view. We haven't taken a look into this, and the receiver can hearten notes that's sent. Now, here's what we should keep in mind that we need to take a look at. And I think we can, let's actually start to take a look at this right now, especially when it comes to deleting a note. So users can't view other notes. Notes should be as secure as possible for public-facing notes. And another one that we're going to take a look at is notes should only be deleted by people who have access. Because you don't want people... since we're deleting the note by the note ID, since this function is publicly available to anyone who has access to this page, users could theoretically grab the UUID. In this case, we're passing the UUID into a particular note. You can see here, if I was to look at table plus, the UUID for this note is this right here. Of course, it's a little bit more secure since we are using a UUID, but in Laravel, Livewire actually has a fantastic documentation about this when it comes to security. Basically, some steps that you can take, and we're going to take a look at one of those steps right now, which is authorizing specific actions. Basically, what this means is that only people who can delete notes should be able to delete them. So let's go ahead and create that policy now. What we can call is just PHP artisan make policy, note policy. So this is the structure that Laravel kind of expects as the name of the model and then policy in this particular case. And then we can just call -- model equals note. So if we were to take at the note policy look, here you can see that a bunch of different functions have kind of already been created for us. View any, view, create, update, delete, and it's already given us the note and the user. Now, basically, unless something is filled into this, you kind of lock everything down. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to first take a look at the delete option. And let's actually just go ahead and say return false. So basically, no one can delete anything. And let's take a look at how this plays out. So if I was to try delete, I was able to delete because we haven't authorized this function. So let's go ahead and look at how we can authorize that in our show notes Livewire. So instead of here, we're going to find the note, and then we're just going to say, let's just go ahead and say this authorize. Then we'll say this is the function that we're calling and the model that we're passing in. So let's check to make sure that this person is authorized to delete the given note, since we're finding that note via here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what this means. Now that we have it authorized, let's create a note. I will set it for tomorrow. Schedule note. Perfect. Now if I was to delete it, action is unauthorized. So I can't delete this note. But here is where we can actually start to create these policies. Basically, we want to say the user, in this case, we're automatically passing it in because it's automatically being passed in via Livewire, via Laravel. Are they able to delete the given note? And we want to say, do they own that particular note? So here's what we can do. User ID is equal to note user ID. So that basically says they're only able to delete this note if the user matches the user ID of the note. So if we hit authorize now, bam, we can delete it because we own that particular note. But now anyone who has the UID and has a login within this application, they can't delete these notes. Perfect. We're looking good. Okay, so now we have the ability to delete a note only if that note is assigned or allocated to that specific user. So now nobody can just delete any random note if they have the UID. But now let's get into editing. And this is where it's a little bit easier to show just how easy it is to edit specific things if you have access to the given ID and the URL. And to do this, we're actually going to take a look at what Volt single page routes look like. And what this means is what we've been doing recently. If we were to take a look at our web route folder, we're creating views that link to a specific blade file. You know, we have notes create note and show notes. Sorry, that's in Livewire. Notes create and index. And then we're just using specific Livewire, functions within our create and index. Now, this is okay, but what if you need to just have a whole bunch of different live functionality within a full page? Now, we can do that within Livewire Volt. So let's go ahead and open our terminal, and we can actually call PHP artisan make Volt notes / create note, and then we'll do -- class. Oops, not create note. Sorry about that. Let's do edit note. Now we should be good. Perfect. Okay, so we have this Volt component. Let's go ahead and say hi there. Now, this is mostly just to show how we can, This is mostly just to show how we can, I want to close that out. Now, this is mostly just to show how we can create a specific route and point it to a Livewire Volt component instead of having to create that blade view. And it just shows some niceties of Livewire itself. So what we can do is Volt route, and then we're going to say notes / notes. This is a kind of wildcard function. So any ID that we pass in here is going to automatically pull in that particular note. So notes where the ID is the ID of the note, edit, and Laravel and Livewire kind of give us that out of the box. We don't have to do anything else. Notes, edit, and then we can call the same middleware and name of before. And since we don't have Volt pulled in, we can just pull that in, use Livewire Volt, and that should give us everything we need. So if we were to go into our notes and we were to say, let's actually create one first. And again, it's not the best to be able to have to create these all manually. We'll get into how we can just kind of manually push through notes in a little bit, but it's not as time consuming right now, at least for me. Okay, first note is created. Now what we'll kind of do before we kind of, let's go ahead and link this up to our show notes Livewire. So we want to view the note right here. This actually, let's link it right here instead. So we want this to be a route notes.edit, and then we're passing in the note. Let's call wire navigate, and let's see what that does. First note, you can kind of see here that it's showing the note ID down here. So if I was to pass in unable to find component notes.edit, and that is because it's not notes.edit, it is note.edit. So let's go back. Note.edit not defined. Let's see. Notes.edit. Okay, I think it's because we're not pulling in. Okay, so that's where we went wrong. Let's go ahead and look at our route. We have volt route that shows the notes.edit, and that's not actually correct, because if we were to take a look at our Livewire views, we have notes edit dash note. And so that's what we need to call here, notes.edit dash note. And so this naming convention isn't necessarily perfect, because we probably should just call this edit. But so we have notes, create note, edit note, show notes. That's probably redundant because it's in a note folder. But since we've done the other ones, let's just keep it for now. But that's where we went wrong. So let's go ahead and take a look now. And Livewire page component layout view not found. So this is basically what Livewire single file or single page components look like. Instead of having a full page, it needs a layout to adjust to. And what we're going to do is, instead of creating a layout, we just want to use the app layout that's been already provided. And here's what we can do within that edit note. And here's what we can do is, instead of having to create a new layout and kind of copying everything in, we just want to use that app layout. And what we can do here is say, first we want to use Livewire /attributes /layout. And then it's going to throw off some of the formatting that I have here, but we're going to say new layouts.app. So if I was to save this, there we go. Perfect. So we have notes. Hi there. Hi there. Of course, we're not pulling in any information, but you can see here that this note is, the edit page is working. Now, how do we get the information from that route, from this route that we're passing in the note? And you can remember, if you take a look at our show notes page, we're actually just passing in the whole note function. We're not just passing in, note ID. We're actually passing in the entirety of the note. And that's a key point here, because we can use all of the note in our because we're passing in a model. That's also, one, keeping it more secure, but two, we can actually utilize all the functions and methods that are available within that note. So let's take a look at our edit note again, and let's start to scaffold this out. So since we're using the note itself, let's just go ahead and call it. So we're public function note. And we can use app/models/note. Then let's go ahead and have this mount function. You can see here that GitHub Copilot's kind of already typing this out for me. Note, this note equals note. That's one way of doing it, but we also want to fill this note. So basically what that means is everything that, because we're going to have fields, since this is an edit, we want all of those fields to be automatically filled when the note is mounted. So we want to say, and because we're kind of initializing it here, this fill, and we'll say note. Now if we were to call note title, we should be able to see that here. First note is created perfectly. See? So this fill basically just sets the note string or state, if you will, the note state of this particular Livewire component. We're mounting the note that is being passed in and setting it to this particular page. And then we can say note title, we can say note ID, and let's just go ahead and separate it out, and we'll just say class flex space x2 or space y2, just to kind of utilize what all of this is doing. And I mostly just want to kind of show what when that authorization piece is going to come in as well. So we could say, because all of this is being passed, anything that we have available to the note, user, email, all this can be passed in to this page. And this is where sensitive information can technically be leaked. Not only would we give people the ability to edit notes, but they could see information if we're passing that to the page. Now, the great part about Livewire being server rendered is we're only passing information to the page that we explicitly pass. It's not like we're passing the entirety of the note and then we have access to that. It's not completely true. Only the information that's being passed into that note. But we do want to make sure that the person who is authorized to edit this note can edit that note. So if I was to take this note ID, I was to log out and log into that other user I created, joshsmith@test.com. Of course, we don't have access to that note, but I was to send notes/notes/edit. All of a sudden, I have access to this note. That's not a good sign, because if we had the ability to edit this note, I could do that. And of course, again, the great part about this is we started off with creating WUI-Ds, and that's mostly because, one, it helps just kind of cut. One, it helps keep things a little bit more secure and anonymous, but two, it's a little bit harder to guess. You don't just go around randomly guessing a WUI-D, but if it was notes/to/edit, that's a little bit easier to abuse. But this is where we can, again, get into Laravel's policy. So let's go ahead and create that policy. Well, since we already have that policy, let's use that note policy. And we have create. Now let's, edit. So that's going to be update. And here it is. So we basically want to use the same function that we used for the previous note. We can just copy and paste that in. Return user ID if the note user ID. Basically, this is return true if the user ID is equal to note user ID, return true. Otherwise, return false. So if we were to say return false and try to access this again, what we can do, of course, we're not authorizing this yet, but what we can do in the note policy, in edit note, is going to be this authorize. This is where we can call update for note. So again, only complete the rest of this if the user, and because Livewire kind of handles all of that for us, is actually able to update that note. So for it to go back, this action is unauthorized. Perfect. Now, if we were to return true here, then we would be able to view this again. If we wanted to return, again, this is just looking for something that is either true or false, and Boolean. We could, return random. If you wanted to have a policy that only allows people at random to access something, you could do that, I guess. But this is where we just want to return true if the user ID is equal to the notes user ID. Now we should be able to not access this. But if I was to go back and log out and, log out, and we're logging in with the original user. And view the note. I'm able to access this. Again, incredibly easy note policies. And now we have the ability to edit a note. Now, before we go any further, let's go ahead and deploy this to fly.io. So let's go back into our terminal, and we basically just want to say fly deploy. Actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and save this. So we've done a little bit, and usually I would like to commit before I do a bunch of things like this. So that's my bad. But we'll go ahead and git add, and we'll just say we'll add it all, and we'll say that this is ability or note creation and policies. Okay, and let's go ahead and push that to GitHub. Now, let's run fly deploy. So that way we can get everything kind of synced up to our image, our setup in the cloud, just so we can verify, okay, everything's working like we intend it to work, at least at this moment in time. One of the things that I always like to do is make sure that I push to production as quickly as possible, even before we've launched a product or anything like that, mostly just to make sure everything still works like I hope and intend it to work. And that's one of the things that Fly actually gives you that makes it super simple. It's just being able to kind of just push fly deploy, and everything should work as expected. Perfect. So let's go ahead and check out send notes. And there we go. I can't remember if we had actually, okay, we did create a user, so we have no notes, but look how speedy this is. And again, we're on production. It's insane how fast we can get a Laravel app running. Again, all server rendered, and we're ready to go. Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's keep trucking along. So let's go ahead and take a look at our notes. Notes will be sent publicly via email. This is one we still have to work on. But so far, everything is looking pretty good. We know that users can't view other people's notes. We can go ahead and cross that off. Public once sent, and we'll get into that part. Notes should be as secure as possible. We kind of started using UUIDs and the benefits behind that, and notes should only be deleted by people. Perfect. We're moving pretty fast so far. So let's go ahead and let's just make sure that everything is good to go. And this is back in test. Awesome. So we have the ability to view a note. Now let's actually be able to have it be edited. So let's go ahead and jump into our code. And this is our edit note. So we have it being authorized, it being filled. Basically, we have that information available to us in here. And now let's go ahead and just make sure this is able to be edited. Now, since we are using the app layout, I'll go ahead and look at the note index just to grab all of this. So that way it's kind of a similar layout. So that way we can say, hey, we'll edit note. And in here, we'll just go ahead and say, instead of, actually be similar to note create. So that way, instead of having this Livewire notes.create, we'll just kind of keep all of this here. So we'll just kind of copy this and paste that in. Paste that in here. Okay, so we should just say that, hey, this is our form. My form. And let's see what that looks like. Perfect. It looks like we added some extra app layout. So we don't actually need this app layout because we're calling that via Livewire. And there we go. Awesome. So notes, we're editing a note. This is where our form is going to go. And this is where we're creating the note, viewing the note. Okay. Everything's starting to look good. Now let's actually build out this form. So first, let's go ahead and create our state. Again, this is where our note is living, and because we already kind of built that out, let's go ahead and just pull it from our create note file. So create note, just pull all of this information. So here we have here, and we'll put this in our edit note, and maybe we'll also grab the we won't grab it. We'll write that from scratch. So we'll have a public function of save note because we want this note to be updated and saved. And then we'll just go ahead and call this validate. Same thing as well. Note title. Let's actually grab all of that from the previous create note, just so that we have this in a similar fashion. We don't want it to be validated any differently. Then we'll go ahead and say this note update. And this is where we can actually pass in the individual strings again. So title, body, recipient, and is published. And I don't think we're editing the recipient. We can edit the recipient as well. So there we go. And yeah, so note title, body, recipient, send date. And then maybe we'll have an is published as well. So that way we can say, we'll say note is published. That way we can just have it be available to say, okay, hey, maybe I created this node, but now I don't necessarily know if I want to send it, but I don't want to delete it. Maybe it's more, I don't know, just to have that ability and function. Since any note that has been created is automatically set to published within our create note file. You can see, remember here that we created is published. Is published is equal to true. There we go. Because we want any note that has been created with a send date, and that's required to be published, so it's ready to be sent. But we want this to be correlated to note is published, just in case. I don't know if this needs to be required because it's a Boolean, so it doesn't matter which if you have it required or not. Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's actually fill in the rest of the notes. So we can say this note title is title, body, recipient, send date, note is published, and that should be good to go. So now let's go ahead and create that form. So let's go ahead and give this a class similar. Actually, we can go ahead and take the create note form as well, because we're just going to add a couple extra things. So let's go ahead and take this, and we'll paste this in. And I think the only thing that we have to add is a published button. So we'll say X checkbox, and we'll just call this, we'll say label equals note published. Wire model equals note is published. Perfect. And let's see what we've got here. Awesome. And there we go. You can see because we didn't add that default value of publish. So if we were to save this, we'll actually save. Instead of schedule note, we'll just say save note, and we'll call this as save note. Let's see how this works. So we're saving method or action submit does not exist. Okay, we didn't save this after I said it. So save note in the form wire submit. Okay, let's go ahead and refresh. Submit does not exist on component edit note. Let's see. That is why. We don't actually need wire click. We're actually just going to say that this is a type of submit. And we can actually change that in our create note as well, because any button with a type of submit, so we actually don't want this to be a wire click of submit, is automatically going to use the forms wire submit function. That way we know, hey, this button is a submit button. So let's go ahead and submit what is associated with the form. So now that we have this, save it. Perfect. If I was to refresh, okay, doesn't look like that's saved. Let's go ahead and see what's happening here. Edit note. We have wire submit save note. This note update is published to note update. Okay. Let's go ahead and check our note model to make sure that everything looks good there. Let's just say test, save. Okay, so that's changing, but not the published. Let's take a look. Edit note. Filling note, and this note published is note is published. And let's double check to make sure that that's what we called it in table plus. Is published. Okay, now it's showing as set to true. Okay, the reason why this is not working, so the reason why note is published is not working is because we need to set this up as a cast in our model. This took me a little while to figure out, but basically what we need to do is set up a specific cast. So we can say public function casts. Protected casts, and then we can set this as an array, and mostly we just need is published, and we can set this to Boolean. This is mostly just to say that, okay, this cast is set up so that it allows the checkbox to see whether it's actually true or false instead of the 0 to 1 that we see in the database. So now, if we were to refresh, now it just works. So we save this and refresh, save it, refresh. Okay, everything's working perfectly. But we don't really get any feedback that this has been refreshed. So let's make a few UI changes for that. First off, let's actually have two buttons, one that we can kind of return back to notes. So we'll say X button href equals route, and this is going to be notes dot index. Perfect. We don't really need the type button, and we'll call this. We'll say this is just the WIREUI attributes that we have. We can call this flat and negative, and we'll just say back to notes. And let's actually call this as a flex, and then we can do justify between. So we have a little bit of a space between each of these buttons. Type submit. We don't need a right icon of calendar necessarily, but we'll say that the spinner is save note, so we can actually call this specific to the wire submit that we're calling. And let's see what that looks like. Actually, instead of having it be primary, let's call it secondary. The way it looks a little bit different. Perfect. So we have back to notes, and we can see it. And okay, now let's get some visualization that this note has actually been saved. Now, when we first installed Laravel Breeze, we get some components out of the box. One of those is a, I believe it is a action. Yep, there we go. Action message. Now, what this basically does, and you can kind of look into this, is it Livewire, Laravel Livewire has an ability to emit what is called a event or an action. For example, we can say after a server function happens, say saving a form, we can emit something called like, hey, this has been saved. And basically this action message gives us the ability to do that without having to code this all ourselves. This just basically says when there's a particular event that is returned, hey, let's show this saved attribute unless you call a specific slot of what you want it to be called. And then we'll just kind of fade that out after a little bit. Basically, this just gives us that ability to see a little saved flash after we call an event. So let's go ahead and add that to our edit note. And we'll just go ahead and say this is X action message, and we'll just say this is on note saved. Again, this is the event that it's listening for. It has a particular, and you can see here that the prop that it takes is on. And we'll just go ahead and call that in our save note. We can say emit note saved. So if we were to go back to our note and save this, emit not found on component. That is not emit. It is dispatch because we want to dispatch an event. So we'll say this dispatch. Awesome. Now it should be good to go. So if we were to refresh, this is saved now. And there we go. We get this little saved icon or attribute to be able to have some visualization of, hey, this note has now been saved. Perfect. Okay. We have notes edited. We have the ability to create notes. We have the ability to delete notes. Now, before we move further, just so we have a little bit more notes to play with, let's look into seeders. Now, seeders are the ability to basically fill your database with information that can be fake or not fake relatively easily. Instead of having to manually, create notes by hand or use that PHP artisan tinker function that we kind of did for a little bit, this just gives us the ability to automate how notes, in this case, are notes, but anything within a database is automatically populated. So let's go ahead and create a seeder for notes. We're going to call a PHP artisan make factory. And we're going to say note factory, and we're going to have it attached to the model of note. So the factory is what is called when we call a seeder. So there's kind of two components: a factory, which tells a seeder what to actually fill the database with, and the seeder, which is actually called to complete the task of filling the database. And so what we can do here within this definition is we basically can just give Laravel the ability of saying, okay, it's kind of GitHub Copilot's kind of creating this for us. But basically, we can set, and here's where for user ID, we can actually call user factory. So Laravel provides a user factory out of the box for us to be able to create users from scratch. We need to call ID of this Faker UUID. Okay. Now we have a title of Faker sentence. We have a body of paragraph, send date of specific date. And we actually want to say this Faker, and we'll say date. Let's see. Date between, we'll say date time between. And we can say, now plus 1 year. Perfect. So these should only create notes that are now and in the future. And we can call like plus, let's just call plus 10 days. Okay, as published, Boolean, so that's going to be kind of at random. Actually, we'll call this to true to automatically set that. And then the heart count, we haven't actually got into that yet, but we'll just say that that's set between 0 and 20. And that should be good to go. So let's go ahead and let's create a seeder. So again, factory is what is being used as kind of the code to run a seeder. And a seeder is going to be the action that takes that factory code and runs it to fill your database. So let's go ahead and create that seeder. So it's PHP artisan make seeder, note seeder. There we go. Awesome. Note seeder. Perfect. So let's go ahead and say when we run this seeder, we want to grab all users. So basically all users have been created. And for each of them, let's just have a note fact. So let's pull in the user model. And yeah, what GitHub Copilot kind of created is fine. We basically want to take the note factory and let's create 10 and we set the user ID to user ID. Okay, that looks great. Okay, so what do we do now? We basically can call this note seeder, and that's going to be in the seeder database seeder section. So we can call this call, and instead of user seeder, we'll just call note seeder because we're automatically kind of calling the note, the user seeder class. So we'll say a note seeder class. Perfect. And let's go ahead and go back to our database and we'll just say PHP artisan db seed. Oh, looks like we have an error. Notes.recipient. Okay, we did not add in our factory the ability to have the recipient. So we'll say recipient and this equals this faker email. Perfect. There we go. Okay, let's go back to our perfect. So note seeder has been run. Now, if we take a look at our refresh, we have a whole bunch of notes. And of course, we can probably style this and make this a little better. But for now, everything looks like it's good to go. We have specific information. So this title, we can probably, no one is probably sending a note with that long of title. So we could either truncate that, or for title, we could say, instead of sentence, we could probably say, I believe we can call words, and then we could say, 5. Perfect. So if we were to I don't know if there's a way to call database or remove the latest database entries that were seeded in Laravel. Let's see if there's a way to do that. I actually don't know. So not migrate rollback. That might work actually, because it says it calls. Okay, so yeah, PHP artisan migrate. Okay, so we added them again, and now we can run PHP artisan db seed. Perfect. Now, if we were to look at this, we should have our notes. Okay, and 5 words is a little bit cleaner. And of course, we can style this a little bit better so it's not so clunky. But it looks like we have things in a decent spot to be able to kind of move forward. We have notes that are easily edited. And it looks like this date didn't work. So we have December 13th, 14th. But it looks like it didn't pull in here. And it's probably because it's a date time instead of a date. I think in our seeder we can change that. Let's check. Let's take a look at if that fixes things. So migrate rollback, migrate, and dbc. Perfect. Let's check now. It doesn't have the correct. Let's see. Let's see if we can fix this. Let's see, we need a date in a specific format. Okay, so the format is going to be, we do plus 30 days. Let's see if that does it. Okay, time to run it all again. So migrate rollback, migrate DB seed. Perfect. Okay, so now that we have notes kind of filled in, now we can start the process of what does it look like to have a publicly viewed note? And then what does it look like to send notes? And this is where we're going to kind of utilize email, we're going to utilize cron jobs, and we're going to utilize background jobs as well to send all of these emails every single day. If we have 100 users sending thousands of emails, background job would be perfect because we don't want all of that to kind of like overload our server. So let's go ahead and create the public view of a note. Basically, when we are showing notes, this little eye icon, we want to be able to view a note, and this is the link that's going to be publicly sent. Now, in our web routes folder, we've only used the middleware of auth, which basically means only people who are logged in can view any of these pages that we've created. So how do we view the information of a note, but have that sent so someone doesn't have to be authenticated to view it? Well, let's take a look. So we want a route to get and notes /note. So this is again going to be the wildcard view of a note. And then this is where we could put this into a controller, but since we're only using one page, let's just build this into the route itself. And now a lot of people do like to use single action controllers. So say, hey, this is the note controller or public note controller, for example, and it only returns one method. Since this is a simple application, we're just kind of learning the basics of the tall stack. We're just going to put all of this into the route itself. So we're just going to say a function of, we're going to pass in a note. And then we're going to say, hey, if the note is not published, we're going to abort with the 404, and we can change this later. But if that doesn't pass, then we're going to say the user as the note user. And we're going to return a view of, let's do, instead of notes show, we'll do notes view. And we'll pass in the actual note itself. So the note is going to be the note that is viewed, and the user is going to be the particular user of the note. So since we're grabbing the notes user, this is so that we can kind of say, okay, who sent this note? We can publicly display that. And then we'll just go ahead and call this notes, name notes.view. Okay, there we go. So basically, let's bring this in. So the note model, so if a note is not published, we're going to abort a 404. But if that passes, let's take the user and pass it into this variable, and that's the user of the note. So person who published it has sent it. And then we're passing in the actual note itself and the user. Instead of notes, let's actually make this note. Okay, now let's create the notes.view file. So we have notes, and let's create view.blade.php. So this is a public view because we didn't authenticate it. There's no middleware on this particular note. And since there's no middleware, we're going to use the xguest layout. And this is basically what all of the authenticated, or all of the login and register pages are using, the xguest layout. We can see that here, layouts, guest. This is what we'll be using. Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's just say div of flex, justify between, and we'll go ahead and end that div and just say that this is the h2 with the class of text. Okay, perfect. But instead of notes, this is going to be the note title that's being passed in. And then we'll call the actual note body, but we don't want a string limit anymore because we're returning the whole body. And then let's say another div, and this is where the notes author is going to be, and also a Livewire component to heart a note. So let's go ahead and say this. There's an H3 with the note, or actually not note. Let's do the user because we were passing that in name, and this is where we'll have Livewire heart react. We'll pass in the note variable. So this is how Livewire kind of expects any props to be passed in to another Livewire component is :note. And we can pass in that note variable that we did. For this H3, let's go ahead and say this is sent from username. Let's make that maybe like text small. And then in this div, let's do a class of flex item center, justify end, some space on top. Perfect. And let's see. Yeah, let's see what this looks like. We don't actually need it small here. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so if we were to go here, let's take the UUID here. And this is found here, so that way we can grab this. And let's just remove /edit. Okay, unable to find component heart react. Okay, just so we can see this, let's actually create this component. That's going to be a PHP artisan make volt heart react -- class. Okay, now there we go. Perfect. So this is our note. We have the note title, the note itself, and then sent from Josh Siri. Okay, so everything looks decent with this. We'll maybe add a little bit of space here, and maybe like a little bit of space on the bottom as well. Okay, that looks decent. So if we were to go into our heart react, let's go ahead and start building this out. So what do we need for heart react? Basically, it's a Livewire component where we're just updating the count on the note function. And since we're already passing that in because we took the note that we're passing to the public view and we're passing that model, the representation of that note state, and we're passing that in to this heart react. So let's go ahead and build this out. So let's see, we'll just say, I think this should actually be relatively simple because we basically want to take in the note. We want to say that there's a heart count on this, and we could probably keep that consistent. So public heart count, and we want to first, mount the note. So again, this is taking the state that is being passed in to this component, in this case, a note, and it's saying, okay, we want to associate this with an actual model. So we're grabbing the note heart count. There we go. And okay, so if we were to go back and view this type of note, anonymous type of note. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, yeah, we're not actually bringing in the note here, so we'll say use app /models /note. There we go. So we're not actually displaying anything here. So let's go ahead and let's make a button. We'll say X button. We'll make it extra small. Give it a wire click of, and we won't add that yet, but that's where we can add the heart count. So increase the heart count. We'll say this is a rose button, icon of heart, and we'll just call a spinner, and this is going to only be associated with the method that's associated with this particular component, actually anything on the page. But since we only have this one Livewire component on the page, this just means it's going to show spinner anytime an AJAX request runs on the page. And we'll just say heart count. So if we're to take a look, perfect, 14. Now let's go ahead and add some space in between here. Space X. This should work because we have the H3. Maybe we need some more space. Okay, so it doesn't look like it's actually adding that space to it. So let's just go ahead and maybe we'll add that manually to this component ML4. Let's do that. Okay. We'll say it up here. So MR4. There we go. That looks a little better. We'll say MR2. Perfect. Okay. So now we have the heart count and we have who it's sent by. We have the note. So let's go ahead and wire this up so that way we have the heart count active. So we'll say this is public function increase heart count. And we'll say this note update heart count. Okay, that looks good. So yeah, basically all we're doing is increasing the heart count every single time that this button is clicked. And again, it's taking the note that's being mounted onto this component. It's increasing the heart count by that note and then saving it to the file. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. So like we could do this note update, or we could do this note heart count plus, and then we could do this note save, and we could make sure that this is associated with the heart count. So that would be one way of doing it, or we could definitely keep it what GitHub Copilot sent us as well. So whatever kind of makes sense in your head. I kind of prefer this to know that, okay, we're increasing it and then we're saving the note. So let's see, 15, 16. There we go. And you could see here that the spinners is working if we were to increase the, if we were to throttle this, for example. Let's refresh the page. Okay, now we're throttling. So our production database is going to be a lot faster than this, but if you have slow users, this is just to kind of show that, hey, something is happening behind the scenes, so that way you're not just kind of like waiting, okay, did this button actually get updated, for example. And let me make sure I change this back, so that way I'm not waiting consistently on this. Perfect. And yeah, that is looking good. So we have a public page. Now, if we are to go and edit this, let's go ahead actually and duplicate this page so that way we can go into the edit page. And since we're logged in, we should be able to edit it. Let's remove this publish function and refresh. And all of a sudden we have 404 because this that we said in our web route, if the note is not published, abort with 404. Perfect. We are moving along just great. So one thing I do want to show before we get into the back-end stuff of jobs and emails is a Livewire spinner. And that sounds interesting, but basically Livewire has the ability to create a loading function on a page that is waiting to load specific information. Now, when we have if a user, for example, has created hundreds of notes, of course, we could add something like pagination to make it a little bit easier to kind of view all those. We could add search functionality. I would say dive into that on your own. It's definitely super easy, especially with Livewire. It gives you that functionality basically for free. You don't have to do too much. But if we do have a bunch of notes so that we're pulling from the database and we need all that information on one single page, that page might take a little bit to load. Livewire gives us the ability to basically have placeholder on the page until the page loads. So let's take a look. So let's go to our show notes. This is what Livewire will give us out of the box. And I'm going to actually copy and paste this. So I'm just going to kind of have this sit here. But basically, just because this is a SVG that is a spinner, I basically found this using like Tailwind CSS spinner. I think it's Flowbyte. Yep, here we go. So you can just go ahead and kind of copy and paste this particular code from Flowbyte. But basically, it's saying that anytime we're waiting for this component to load, then we're just going to show this spinner until that information gets loaded. And so if we have a whole bunch of different notes that are waiting to get sent, we want to make sure that we show something so that way users can tell, hey, something is happening on this page. And now in our notes index, we can add this one little word, lazy. So anytime we're waiting for notes to load, we should see that loading spinner. So if I was to go back and take a look at our notes, we see this little spinner over here. Now, this is perfect for in production when we do have more notes to call. And it does take a little bit more because we're grabbing more information than just one page. Okay, now let's dive into actually sending emails so that we can send emails to these recipients. So people who created notes, they have a person that they had in mind to send this to. But how do we actually send it? And this is where Laravel gives us some neat functionality out of the box, and then we'll hook it up into production to make it worthwhile. So let's dive into our code. And this is where we're going to start with a command. Now, this is mostly just to show that there are different ways of kind of having these server actions. We could have events that says, okay, anytime a note is created, let's schedule a job to send at a certain time. But this is what I think is a great way of showing off a bunch of different features of Laravel. So let's go ahead and say PHP artisan make command send scheduled notes. Now, command is anything that is going to be called by the console. So I could, if we were to go into our send scheduled notes, you see here that this is an app send scheduled notes. Now, let's just go ahead and return some text. So basically, all I want to do is, this info, hello world. Okay. This is just to show what this is doing. If I was to go back into my terminal and if I was to go PHP artisan app send scheduled notes, we get hello world. Anything that is inputted into the handle of command gets run when that command is run. Now we could manually run these commands if we want to. You could you could set up a GitHub action. You could do this manually by SSHing into your server. There's a bunch of different ways to run these commands, but we're going to create this command so that we can schedule the command to run every single day and not have to worry about it. So function handle, and we're just going to pull in carbon, which is the date. So we're going to say now equals carbon now. We're going to say we want to grab all the notes where note, and we pulled in that model where is published is equal to true. And then we want to say where the send date is equal to now date to date string. Perfect. And then we want to get all those notes. And then for each, let's actually just go ahead and return the note. So we say note count. That way we can kind of show that this is working in the terminal. Notes count. And we'll say this info sending this number of scheduled notes. Perfect. Then we'll do for each notes as note. Oops. Let's say send email. We don't actually have this created yet. This is where we're going to create a queue, a background job that we can say, okay, for every single note, let's send an email to that note. Let's go ahead and make that. So if we go into our terminal, we can say PHP artisan make job send email. Perfect. So now we should be able to see this in our code. So send email dispatch note. And I pulled that in as a job. Use app jobs send email. Perfect. So now, obviously, we don't have anything created in the send email dispatch note. But if I was to take a look and let's just edit a couple of these to change them to today. And we'll save it and publish it. And we'll say this is today published. Okay, now if we were to go back into our terminal and I was to run PHP artisan app send schedule notes, we should see that there's at least a couple of notes set for today. Yep, 2 scheduled notes. Perfect. So now, how do we actually send this email? Again, we're creating this command to basically give us the functionality to send these notes, send emails to the recipients of these notes. And this is mostly just so we can have something that is run in the background, a cron job. And that's basically a server job that runs on a specific set of time. And then we're just ready to send it. And now, again, what this app send schedule notes is doing is just saying, give me all the notes where the send date is equal to day. And we might send this at let's say we'll send it at 9 a.m. Eastern time. So at 9 a.m., any note that is scheduled to send for now on our server in terms of, hey, someone sent this for December 15th or January 1st or January 18th. Any note that is set to send on that particular date is going to be sent on the server time at 9 a.m. Eastern. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually create that send email job. So if we go to send email, this basically just takes in the information in the construct folder, and then we're going to handle this as well. So we can say public note and pull this in. Perfect. And then in the handle, we can say the note URL is going to be config app URL /notes this note ID. And this is basically just saying, okay, I want to get the public facing URL of the note. So we're using the app.url. So in our environment variable, we're saying this is send notes.test. And so that's going to be the public facing URL of this particular note. But when we're in production, that's going to obviously be different. And we set that in our fly.toml. We sent specifically to the app URL sendnotes.fly.dev. And so that's the information that we have. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue sending these emails. So we have a note URL. Let's say the email content is actually going to be the subject of the note, or the title of the note, I should say. And we'll actually just kind of hard code this. So, hello, you've received a new note. And then we'll just go ahead and say, yeah, view it here. And then let's go ahead and actually send the email. So there's a few ways of doing this, and we're just going to do it super simple. We can actually just say that we just want to send the email in a raw format, plain text, for example. And you can create a fancy mail. I would advise checking out the Laravel documentation for emails. So these mailable is basically the ability to create specific views, so you can kind of style it with Tailwind, for example. It's pretty fascinating. But we're just going to create it in raw format this time. So we're going to say mail, and we're going to say raw. We're going to take the email content, and we're going to send a message, and we're just going to say message from. And this is where we'll kind of hard code in some data here. And of course, we can do this with an environment variable. But here's where, when we push it into production, we want to create, we need this to come from an email that we have email access to. I'm just going to say note share at zinfi.co. And it's from note share. Actually, we'll call it send notes. Perfect. And we'll say this is to this note user email. Actually, it's not the user's email. It's going to be the recipient. And we'll say the subject is, we have a new note from, and this is where we can put in the user's name. We'll add a space there too as well. Okay, this is great. This looks good. Now, how do we actually see to make sure this is working properly? Now, in the environment, we can actually set mail to log. And basically, what this is going to do is it's just going to log out information from this email. So we have a Laravel log file. Actually, we haven't actually logged anything out probably yet. So we can just go ahead and log. And there's a bunch of different options that Laravel gives you to kind of view mailables, view emails within your testing environment. Let's just go ahead and run that set and schedule notes again. And it looks like we have an error. Let's take a look. Unclosed on line 34 for send email. There we go. And that should do it. So perfect. Send schedule notes, and we have a Laravel. We should have a log file. Let's take a look. It should be in public. Or storage logs, Laravel log. And we're going to actually just scroll all the way to the, instead of doing that, I'll just go ahead and erase it and save, and then we'll just run it again. Okay, now we have that raw email basically. So it was sending to waters.shauna and Filiberto, and then we have, hello, you've received a new note. Let's view it here. So if I was to take this link and access it in the browser, perfect. We have sent from Josh Siri. Great. So it looks like everything is good to go. So how do we get these notes, this email, these jobs into production? Well, first, before we do that, we need to make sure that this app send schedule notes is actually scheduled to send. And that's where we can add it to what's called the console in Laravel. So if we were to go into console kernel, we have the ability to schedule particular commands that we've created. And since we have that send schedule notes command, we can go ahead and schedule it. So schedule command app send schedule notes. And we'll go ahead and say in the time zone of America, New York, perfect. Daily at 9 a.m. Perfect. That works great. So we're saying, okay, in New York Eastern Time, every day at 9 a.m., let's run this app, send scheduled notes. And then it's going to do exactly the same thing that we're doing right now. Send scheduled notes. If we were to take a look at the log again, we're receiving those emails, and then, we're taking all the notes that are set to be scheduled and we're sending them out. So it actually pushes us into production. There's a couple things that we need to be aware of when we're pushing to production for Fly.io. But the great thing is Fly actually makes this super easy. So let's actually take a look at their documentation. Fly.io Laravel. So for cron and queues, it's as simple as scheduling it. So we can start the cron daemon, enable this in your fly.io. Same thing for queues, enable this in your cron.io, and that's it. I mean, it's as simple as that. So if we were to just, kind of copy and paste this in processes for app cron and app worker in our fly.io, let's go ahead and add this. Let's put it right here. Awesome. So that's it. That's pretty simple. So basically, fly.io now, if we were to deploy this, it gives us the ability to have a cron job and schedule all those commands. But we do have to do one more thing. We have to set up how we're actually sending emails. Now, there's a bunch of different services that we can use to send an email, but I think Postmark is one of the easiest to kind of get up and running. Go ahead and log in. Now you're going to have to create an account and then create a server. And basically, then you'll have to walk through steps to assign like your DNS records for your domain to Postmark to be able to say, hey, I give Postmark control to send emails from my specific domain. So you will have to have a domain handy that you're able to edit some DNS records. I've already done that for my domain. And what I can do is go ahead and create a new server. I'll say this is send notes production. And this is live, so we're going to deliver messages to our recipient. And I'm just going to grab an API token. And of course, I'm going to delete this so you can't actually view it, but we're going to copy this token. And this is what we're going to use for our environment variable. So if we were to go into our environment, and I'm just going to paste this here so that way I just have access to it. And again, this isn't being saved if you push this to GitHub because it's getting already in nors.env files. I'm just going to say postmark access token. Okay, perfect. Just so I have it in place. And I'm going to go ahead and actually push all this to GitHub. Commands, notes, and public views. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and open up how to send emails via Postmark in Laravel. So in configuration, we're going to use the Postmark driver. So we're going to install this. Awesome. Then we can use the Postmark token. So set the default option in your application's mail.php configuration file. So we want to do that. Perfect. So default is mail mailer or SMTP. And so that's what we can do in our environment instead of mail mailer. And this is what we'll do in our fly.toml. So we'll say mail mailer equals postmark. And since to keep it, we'll do double quotations just to keep it consistent. Awesome. Okay, verify your config services contains the following options. Okay, let's take a look. So we have postmark token, environment postmark token. Perfect. So if we were to look at our environment available instead of postmark access token, we'll just call it this. Now, how do we input this into Fly so that we have a secret? Now, there's a couple ways to do that. So everything is set up and ready to go. And of course, you have to make sure that within our access, the settings is able to send as any email. And so if you've already configured this with your domain, so I have configured it with my specific sender signature. You can see here that I have note share as zinfi.co, and I could add another signature of send notes zinfi.co, and we'll create that. Set from name, the send notes app. Perfect. So you can look back and where we send the send email, we sent it from send notes as zinfi.co. I'll just go ahead and say send notes app. Again, this is just to verify with Postmark that you have the ability to send from this email. So if you already set that up with your domain, and again, go through Postmark's settings to kind of go from scratch, but you just basically have to set up your DKIM and SPF records so that Postmark has the ability to send as your domain name. Okay, now I'll set this up in fly.io. Now, fly.io makes it super easy to access any secrets that are available. Basically, you can push it in through the CLI, or we can actually log into the dashboard and create a secret there. We just have to make sure that's set to postmark_token. And a few more things that we'll actually want to do is in our fly.toml, we already have mail mailer equals postmark, but we'll also set mail from address equals send notes zenfi.co mail from name equals send notes. Perfect. Now, instead of putting that environment variable in here, because this is not as secure, we're just going to access that CLI. So we can say fly secrets set postmark token. I'm going to grab the one that's copied right here. So after that's been set, we can go ahead and run fly deploy again. And we can see here that a cron machine and a worker machine are already getting set up and started so that we were ready to go when we actually send that cron schedule at 9 a.m. on Eastern. And there we go. Our app is deployed. So let's go ahead and log in. And we're going to create a note. There we go. Our note's ready to be viewed and deleted if we needed to. So let's do a couple final touches to make sure that we have everything kind of set up and ready. So emails are ready to go out. Cron jobs are ready to go out. We're just going to do two more things. We only want to make sure we edit notes before they're actually sent. So if the date's passed, let's just not have the ability to update this just yet. Second, we need to make sure that we hook up this view icon. And third, let's show something fresh on the dashboard. Okay. Let's go ahead and go to our show notes. So a few things. For the iDashboard, it's going to be as simple as saying href equals route and we'll go notes.view and we'll just pass in the note. Okay, so if we were to go to send notes.test, now we should be able to view those notes. Perfect. Okay, now what about, we don't really need the ability to edit a note if the note date has already been passed, if a note has been sent. First of all, let's utilize our policy that we are creating. We only want people to edit these notes if they can update them, can edit them. Now, they're probably not going to be able to see or even click on this, but this is just to show that Livewire has this functionality built in. So we can say can update note, and that's as simple as that. And it's basically just the ability to have that authorization immediately in our blade file. And we'll say we can show this title else. Let's actually show the note title, but let's actually show the note title, but let's actually make it thick gray 500. And we're not actually going to show any hover underline or anything like that. Okay, so now let's in our can update, let's actually modify it so the user can't update it if the notes pass the specific date. Because of course, there's no really need to. So let's look at our note policy for update. We're not just going to say return user ID, but we also want to make sure that they can update it if the date isn't passed. So we'll say and string, actually do send date is greater than or equal to now. So we're to refresh this. Oh. And it should not be send date, but as note send date. Okay. Perfect. So now you can see 1990. Authorizing the update of the note. There's no even way to click on it. Of course you can modify it, and that's why we have that authorization available. Perfect. So we have the view, we have the ability to click, but only if it's in the future or today. And even then, we don't necessarily need today. But if you're editing this at like now and then you don't want to send, like if it's not being sent until 9 a.m. like I am right now, we don't necessarily, we can still edit this. Perfect. Okay, now let's add one more thing to our dashboard. And I think we're good to go. So let's make one more Livewire component. PHP artisan make volt, and we'll say dashboard stats. Perfect. So let's go ahead and say this is public function with, again, this is bringing in that information when the component is rendered. And we'll return, I want to say notes sent count. So we want to know how many notes have been sent by a particular user. So how many notes have been in the past, and then how many hearts this user is getting per note. So we'll say auth user notes, and we'll say where, we need where send date is less than now. We'll go ahead and say count, but actually we'll say where is published is true. Then we'll grab the count. Perfect. So notes sent count is the auth user's notes, where send date is less than now. So notes that have already been sent, theoretically. We could get more into the weeds on this for notes that actually been sent. We could maybe make a table in the database that says, hey, note was sent when those emails were actually triggered. And we'll just say where is published is true, just to kind of have that extra bit of verification, and then the count. And then lastly, we'll say, let's say notes loved count, so the hearts for each note. Again, that's auth user notes sum heart count. And this is a little neat Laravel function that gives you out of the box. It's just basically saying, okay, for all the notes, give me the sum of the heart count integer on all of those notes. And then let's just go ahead and add this. I'm just going to copy and paste it just for time's sake. Perfect. And this is just a bunch of Tailwinds show, okay, hey, here's the notes sent, here's notes sent count, here's notes loved. Let's go ahead and go to our dashboard. And instead of this hi there, we'll just go ahead and put in that Livewire component. So Livewire dashboard stats. Okay, let's take a look. Bam, there we go. Let's actually edit this so we don't have the white background. I like it. Awesome. Why don't we both commit this to GitHub? And push it. And then we'll also run fly deploy one more time. Fantastic. So we have a full stack application, live, ready in production, the ability to sign in, create new accounts, to be able to send notes. This is being sent today. To be able to create them, to be able to edit them, view them, and the ability to delete them if we need to. But all of this has been done within Laravel, within Livewire, within Volt single class components, within Tailwind, all within the tall stack. Tailwind, Alpine, Laravel, and Livewire. And most of this is stuff that Laravel gives you out of the box, like with Laravel Breeze, with being able to create profiles, with being able to create users, and all of this stuff that Laravel gives you out of the box. So thanks so much for joining with me on this journey to create a full stack application from nothing into production, where we kind of took it piece by piece and say, okay, how do we build an application? How do we think about authorization, database migrations, how a user is going to interact with our application, and overall just how to build things that utilize several different parts of Laravel, several different parts of a server, and make it all one cohesive application. I mean, we talked about models, we talked about migrations, we talked about how to send scheduled jobs and commands and emails, and all of this has been done just to be able to show you the power of Laravel, but also the power of being able to create an application from start to finish. It's not as hard as you might think. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey. Let me know if you have any questions. But this video took a little while to create, and I wanted to just make sure that I showed as much about Laravel as I could, as much about Livewire as I could, mostly just about this new modern way to build applications within PHP and within Laravel. So it would mean a lot if you commented, if you liked, if you subscribed, and I hope to have more content coming out soon. Ultimately, I love building with the tall stack, and hopefully this shows you just a little glimpse of why I do, but also the speed at which you can build full stack applications too.